close your eyes, and let's drift back to the beginning of a country that didn't quite believe in kings, but still desperately needed one. You're trudging through the chilly hills of Virginia, boots scuffing against the red clay. The year is 1789, and George Washington, tall, stiff, and trying not to roll his eyes, is being begged once again to lead something. He didn't want to be president. That's the first thing nobody tells you. You don't carve out a legacy that echoes for centuries by volunteering, apparently. You do it because nobody else can be trusted with the job. Washington's uniform itches, his fake teeth are wooden. Okay, technically made from ivory, bone, and other people's teeth, but wooden sounds better. And his diary is filled with notes about farming, not ruling. But here he is, standing awkwardly at the edge of a newborn government, trying to pretend he knows what a cabinet is. He doesn't. Nobody does. Because this isn't Europe. There are no crowns, no castles, no playbooks. Just raw land, scattered debts, and 13 nervous states hoping that this tall guy with military swagger and zero party affiliation can keep the Union from combusting. And here's where you come in. You're watching Washington tiptoe his way through everything, forming a national bank, setting up executive departments, figuring out how to deal with revolts like the one over a whiskey tax. Yes, people once rioted over whiskey taxes. You probably would have too. He hosts stiff dinners where everyone wears powdered wigs and tries not to burp, while Alexander Hamilton sings financial spreadsheets into existence and Thomas Jefferson quietly seethes in the corner. The cherry tree story. Completely made up. The real George? Way more into reputation than honesty for honesty's sake. He spent half his life curating his image like the world's first influencer. Always formal, always distant. His own stepchildren called him Sir. But he also gave up power. Twice. That's the kicker. He walked away from the presidency after 2 terms, even though the world would have gladly crowned him for life. No drama, no coup, just a quiet exit, like a ghost slipping out of a party before anyone notices. Oh, and here's the fringe bit. Washington had a deep fear of being buried alive. He made his family promise to wait days before sealing his tomb, just in case he, woke up. Imagine the founding father clawing his way out of a crypt, muttering about taxation policy and dental pain. To this day, scholars still debate how much power Washington actually had versus how much people just projected onto him. Was he a true executive genius, or just the tallest guy in the room, playing referee while Hamilton and Jefferson duked it out beneath his wig? Either way, he built something, quietly, reluctantly, and when he finally left, he warned us, in his farewell address, against political parties and foreign entanglements. 2 things we definitely never ignored, right? But before we drift further into the rabbit hole, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're falling asleep from. You're gliding now gently through the frosted windows of a smaller, stuffier White House. Inside, John Adams paces like a man whose shoes are a little too tight and whose enemies are always just out of sight. It's 1797, and you're watching the first peaceful transfer of power in American history. George Washington steps down, and in steps Adams, shorter, louder, with a head full of ideas and a heart brimming with anxiety. You can almost hear the floorboards creak under the weight of his expectations. John Adams is no Washington. He's no war hero, no brooding marble statue type. He's a thinker, a debater, a man who once said, "I must study politics and war that my sons may study mathematics and philosophy." Basically, he's the guy who always reads the full terms and conditions, twice. But unfortunately for Adams, he's president at the worst possible moment to be cautious. France is mad. Britain is mad. Everyone is mad. America is trying to stay neutral, while the rest of the world is doing its best impression of a bar brawl in powdered wigs. And Adams, he's stuck trying to keep the country from falling into another war it absolutely cannot afford. He creates the Navy. That's your first major surprise. Yep, no big ships before him. Adams commissions frigates, builds a fleet, and raises an eyebrow at anyone who dares challenge American sovereignty. But then he stumbles hard into what history kindly calls the Alien and Sedition Acts. You sit cross-legged on the floor, while Adams, deeply paranoid, passes laws that let him imprison or deport immigrants and jail anyone who criticizes the government. It's like if your favorite uncle suddenly started muttering about spies and passed a law against memes. Not his best moment. And here's your quirky tidbit. Adams traveled with his own personal horsehair mattress everywhere, refused to sleep on anything else. That's right, founding father of liberty, also the founding father of mattress snobbery. Despite the fear, the drama, and the alien hysteria, Adams makes one choice that echoes through centuries. He refuses to go to war with France. He avoids full-blown conflict at immense political cost. His party hates him for it. He loses re-election because of it. But he keeps the country from unraveling. He returns home to Quincy, Massachusetts, quietly bitter, deeply principled, and starts writing letters. Lots of letters, especially to Thomas Jefferson, his old rival and new pen pal. The two once practically spat across political aisles, but now they swap dreams and regrets like old soldiers swapping stories. Their correspondence becomes one of the most tender in all of political history. And then, this is where it gets weird, they die on the exact same day. July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson dies a few hours before Adams, whose last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He didn't know that Jefferson had already passed. Historians still argue whether Adams' political paranoia came from genuine threat or just a deeply suspicious nature. Was the alien and sedition panic a reaction to real danger, or the overreach of a man who trusted logic more than people? As you nestle deeper under your blanket, imagine this: a little man in a powdered wig, armed with nothing but a pen and a sharp tongue, trying to keep a newborn country from catching fire, while carrying his mattress through every battle. Tonight, your feet crunch along the gravel paths of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's mountaintop palace of contradiction, symmetry, and secrets. The sun has just dipped behind the Virginia hills, and you're walking alongside Jefferson himself, long-legged and elegant, squinting into the distance like he's trying to see a future that won't cooperate. He's humming to himself, maybe composing a new gadget, maybe silently editing the Declaration of Independence in his head for the 1,000th time. Jefferson is complicated. That's not a hot take. It's the whole story. He's the poet of American liberty, author of one of history's most influential documents, and the owner of over 600 enslaved people. He hated cities but built a capital. He dreamed of farmers but bought an empire. He swore off centralized power but governed like he was redesigning the blueprint of the cosmos. You follow him into the White House, new, unfinished, drafty. The year is 1801, and Jefferson is easing into his presidency with a vision. Smaller government, less debt, fewer frills. He even walks to his inauguration, just to make a point. No coach, no powdered wig, no ceremony. Just a man, striding down Pennsylvania Avenue in plain clothes, whispering Enlightenment ideals. Then he does something no one expected. He doubles the size of the country. That's the Louisiana Purchase, bought from a financially desperate Napoleon for a song. 13 cents an acre, more or less. It's vast, wild, unexplored, and possibly illegal. See, the Constitution doesn't exactly say a president can buy land. Jefferson knew this. He knew he was stretching the rules, but he did it anyway, quietly convincing himself that necessary sometimes beats legal. That's a recurring Jeffersonian theme, by the way. Principles with escape hatches. And now you're canoeing down the Missouri River with Lewis and Clark, sent by Jefferson to map the new land, charm the native nations, and maybe find a non-existent water route to the Pacific. Spoiler, they don't. Along the way, they eat dogs, get lost, and owe their lives to Sacagawea more times than they'd like to admit. Back in Washington, Jefferson's dealing with pirates in the Mediterranean, yes, real pirates. Barbary corsairs demanding tribute, and a sketchy showdown with his own former vice president, Aaron Burr, who kills Alexander Hamilton in a duel, and then maybe tries to start a new country in the West. Normal VP things. And here's the quirky fact of the night. Jefferson was obsessed with mastodons. Seriously, he believed giant prehistoric creatures still roamed the unexplored West and sent Lewis and Clark with instructions to keep an eye out for them. Mammoths, he called them. You imagine Jefferson sitting by candlelight, waiting for someone to burst in with a trunk-bent skeleton and a declaration of victory. Historians still debate how Jefferson reconciled his soaring rhetoric with his human contradictions. Was he a genius trapped by his time, or someone who knew better, but chose convenience over conscience? You wander through his Monticello library now, fingers brushing titles in Latin, Greek, French. He loved books more than people, some say. He died in debt, his house auctioned, his legacy tangled. But his words, those words, still pulse beneath the skin of America. So tonight, you drift off to the sound of philosophical mumbling, clinking glass instruments, and the faint stomp of an imaginary mastodon, somewhere west of the Mississippi. You're walking beside a man so small you barely hear his boots on the polished floor. James Madison, father of the Constitution, framer of frameworks, and surprisingly fierce wartime president. All 5 feet 4 inches of him. He's wearing black, of course. He always wears black. Quiet, studious, perpetually underslept. Madison looks like the type who'd be voted most likely to become a historical footnote. Not someone who'd go toe-to-toe with the British Empire, twice. And yet, here you are. It's 1809. Jefferson has stepped down. The country's doubled in size, and Madison has inherited a mess of rising tensions and crashing trade. Britain is poking the bear, seizing American ships, impressing US sailors into naval service, and treating the new republic like an annoying fly buzzing around Europe's grand dinner table. At first, Madison tries to negotiate. He sends letters, envoys, even tries cutting off trade like an economic parent punishing a misbehaving teenager. But the British just sip their tea and keep on bullying. Eventually, Madison's patience wears out. He puts on his metaphorical war boots, and possibly real ones, but very small. And in 1812, the US declares war. It's not a great idea, You stand beside Madison in the war room as generals mumble excuses and militias don't show up. The Navy scores a few surprising wins, sure. You might remember old Ironsides, the USS Constitution, bouncing cannonballs off its hull like a floating myth. But on land, chaos. The British march into Washington in 1814 and set fire to the White House. Literally. Dolly Madison, yes, that Dolly, saves George Washington's portrait before fleeing. You picture her, skirt swirling, yanking down the frame with soldiers shouting all around. And now, here's your quirky tidbit. Madison, despite his brains and influence, was notoriously soft-spoken. In fact, his speeches were so hard to hear that guests would lean forward awkwardly, squinting like he was a ghost reading from a scroll in a wind tunnel. He's the only president who tried to lead a full-scale war with the vocal volume of a sigh. As the smoke clears, Madison pushes for peace. The Treaty of Ghent ends the war in 1815. No land gained, none lost. Just status quo restored. But bonus trivia, the biggest battle, the Battle of New Orleans, happens after the treaty is signed. Word travels slow, and Andrew Jackson, future chaos tornado of a president, becomes a hero fighting a war that's already over. Back in Washington, Madison's popularity wobbles. Some blame him for the war. Others quietly admit he held the country together when it could have fractured. He strengthens the army, supports a national bank, despite once opposing it, and finally steps down in 1817, ready to retreat to Montpelier and the company of his books. Historians still debate whether Madison was a reluctant warrior or simply overmatched. Did he miscalculate British resolve? Or did he show that America could survive a foreign invasion and still keep its republic intact? You sit quietly now, surrounded by the smell of parchment and ash, listening to the rustling pages of a man who once said, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." He designed the structure, then he watched it shake, and somehow it still stood. You're gliding through calm waters now, coasting into what history dubs the era of good feelings, though you're about to find that good is doing some very heavy lifting. It's 1817, and James Monroe is being sworn in as the 5th President of the United States. He's a Revolutionary War veteran, former governor, diplomat, and secretary of everything at some point or another. If Washington was the stoic father of the country, Monroe is the uncle who shows up with calm energy and a trustworthy handshake. He's also the last president who fought in the Revolutionary War. The final founding father to hold the office. You can almost hear the door clicking shut behind him as a new generation starts lurking in the wings. Monroe's presidency feels peaceful on the surface. There's only one major political party now. The Federalists have fizzled out, and everyone's pretending to get along. Monroe himself tours the country in a big public relations loop, wearing his old uniform and letting Americans bask in the glow of unity. You tag along as cheering crowds throw flowers, and school children try not to fall asleep during his speeches. But behind that curtain of unity, oh, there's tension. The economy is a ticking time bomb. Slavery debates are growing louder, and territorial greed is at full throttle. Monroe's America is stretching its legs, and it's starting to eye its neighbors. In 1820, you hover in the room as lawmakers hammer out the Missouri Compromise. Missouri wants to join the Union as a slave state, but that'll throw off the delicate balance. So they admit Missouri as slave, Maine as free, and draw an imaginary line across the map, slavery below, free above. Temporary fix, very temporary. And here comes Monroe's most famous move, the Monroe Doctrine, which sounds like a term paper, but is actually a foreign policy mic drop. He basically tells Europe, don't even think about colonizing the Americas anymore. We'll consider it a threat. It's bold, it's vague, it's actually written by John Quincy Adams. But Monroe delivers it with the confidence of a man who's never been on Twitter. And now, your fringe fact. James Monroe was so broke when he left office that Congress debated reimbursing him for personal expenses from his public service. He died deeply in debt. Turns out, saving the Republic is expensive, and the retirement plan back then was, well, non-existent. He also holds the record for the most states added during a presidency, 5. You're watching stars get stitched onto the flag like popcorn on a string. Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, and Missouri. The map is swelling like a balloon. Still, scholars continue to debate how much Monroe was a visionary and how much he was just lucky enough to be president when things weren't completely on fire. Was the peace real, or just a calm before the storm? As Monroe fades from office, the unity starts to unravel. New voices are rising, louder and angrier. But for now, you settle into the quiet hum of his legacy. A man who walked battlefields with bleeding boots and tried to build peace with softly spoken warnings. Just don't get too cozy. Because up next, his successor is about to make enemies faster than you can say Harvard. You're seated now at a long, narrow table, across from a man with a face like a storm cloud, and a brain that never ever shuts off. John Quincy Adams, the 6th President of the United States, and arguably the most overqualified person to ever hate being in politics. It's 1825. The election has just ended in chaos. No one got a clear majority. Andrew Jackson had the popular vote, but the decision fell to the House of Representatives. And somehow, John Quincy Adams squeaked through. Jackson's supporters scream about a corrupt bargain, convinced Adams and Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, cooked up a backroom deal. You sit in the back of the chamber as Adams accepts the presidency to a room full of cold stares. The air smells like ink, dust, and bruised egos. Adams doesn't exactly help himself. He refuses to play politics, won't hand out government jobs as favors, and delivers his inaugural address like he's lecturing at a science fair. He believes in merit, public service, and building big national projects. Roads, canals, observatories. He wants America to grow, not just westward, but upward. But Congress blocks him at every turn, not because his ideas are bad, but because he's so incredibly bad at pretending to like people. You walk with him through the new National Observatory proposal, while others roll their eyes and mutter, "Who even needs a telescope?" He's centuries ahead of his time, and it shows. And here's the quirky detail. John Quincy Adams was a fanatical swimmer. He'd bathe in the Potomac River almost daily, completely nude. One morning, a female reporter sat on his clothes until he agreed to give her an interview. That's 19th century journalism for you. Naked diplomacy. His presidency limps along. 4 years of ambitious ideas, few of which are passed. Jackson's forces fume and build momentum. In 1828, Adams loses the nastiest, dirtiest presidential race yet. Smear campaigns, personal attacks, accusations flying like mosquitoes at a swamp party. It's political theater. And Adams is the professor trying to run a lecture series in the middle of it. But here's the twist. John Quincy Adams has one of the most incredible political afterlives in history. After losing the presidency, he runs for Congress and wins. He serves there for 17 more years, turning into a fierce abolitionist and intellectual heavyweight. You're watching a man in his 60s, gaunt, stiff, still dripping sarcasm, rising to speak against slavery, often alone. He fights the gag rule that bans slavery debates in Congress. He defends the Africans aboard the Amistad in front of the Supreme Court. His voice, once drowned out in the White House, now thunders through congressional halls. And then, in 1848, while casting a vote on the House floor, he collapses. They carry him to a nearby chamber, where he dies 2 days later, surrounded by lawmakers who finally understand the size of the mind they'd been ignoring. Historians still wrestle with Adams. Was he too rigid to lead, or too brilliant to compromise? Was his failure in the presidency offset by his triumph in the House? You sit quietly as he adjusts his cravat in the mirror one last time, eyes tired but burning, whispering, "Duty is ours. Results are God's." And just like that, the scholar exits stage left. The air crackles now. Tension in your shoulders, thunder on the horizon. You're not easing into a presidency anymore. You're charging full speed into it, spurs jangling. Andrew Jackson has arrived. It's 1829, and the White House has just become the rowdiest saloon in the country. Jackson's inaugural party spills out onto the lawn. People climb furniture, punch bowls shatter. You watch a servant climb out a window to escape the crowd. It's not so much a peaceful transition as it is a political mosh pit. Jackson is unlike anything the presidency has seen before. Born in a log cabin, orphaned as a teen, scarred on the face from a British officer's sabre. Yes, he literally took a blade to the face as a boy. You glance at his stiff posture, every wrinkle earned, every silence loaded with fury. He's tough, decisive, and deeply, deeply vengeful. He hates debt. He hates elites. He hates the very idea that anyone but the people, meaning, of course, white male property holders, should rule. He styles himself as the champion of the common man, even while crushing those who cross him. You walk with him through the halls of government as he smashes norms like they owe him money. And speaking of money, he declares war on the National Bank, calls it a hydra of corruption. When Congress tries to recharter it, Jackson vetoes the bill in a blaze of anti-elite fury. Then he yanks federal deposits and moves them into state banks, triggering what's later dubbed the Bank War. Economists still argue whether this was a bold populist stand or a financial flamethrower with no plan for what came next. But Jackson's biggest, darkest legacy looms on the Trail of Tears. He signs the Indian Removal Act of 1830, forcibly relocating Native American tribes from their ancestral lands to territories west of the Mississippi. Tens of thousands are displaced. Thousands die en route. The Cherokee fight it legally and win in the Supreme Court. But Jackson allegedly shrugs and says, "Let them enforce it." You ride alongside the wagons, wind whipping through skeletal forests as history tightens its jaw. Now your quirky fact. Jackson's pet parrot had to be removed from his funeral because it wouldn't stop cursing. That's right. Apparently, the bird picked up some spicy language from Old Hickory himself and let it fly at just the wrong moment. You can't make that up. Jackson also survives more assassination attempts than most. One gun misfires, and he literally beats the would-be killer with his cane. He's made of old leather and whiskey, and you feel it in the way he stares down everyone from Congress to the press to his own cabinet. Oh, and the cabinet. It's a mess. His kitchen cabinet of informal advisors, friends, journalists, loyalists, basically runs the show behind the scenes. You watch formal advisors get sidelined while Jackson talks policy over coffee with his inner circle, muttering about jewels and debts. Historians still wrestle with Jackson. Was he a true populist or a dangerous demagogue? A defender of democracy or its destroyer? His enemies called him King Andrew III, a man who wielded the veto like a sledgehammer. But his supporters saw him as the one president who finally listened. You lie back now, heartbeat slowing. Outside, thunder rolls faintly in the distance, and somewhere in the shadows of the frontier, a tall figure in a long coat rides off into the smoke, leaving a presidency scorched and unforgettable. The dust is still settling from Jackson's tempest as you find yourself in a quieter, slicker room. Enter Martin Van Buren, small in stature, big on style, and the first president actually born a US citizen. The revolution? That was history class to him, not lived experience. It's 1837, and Van Buren is stepping into the Oval Office, with polished boots and finely trimmed mutton chops that practically glisten. He's Jackson's hand-picked successor, a savvy political operator often called the Little Magician. Not because he pulls rabbits out of hats, but because he pulls votes out of chaos. You lean close and realize, this man doesn't raise his voice. He just rearranges the entire room while you're blinking. Van Buren is a master of political parties, and he more or less creates the Democratic Party as a national machine. He believes in loyalty, structure, and showing up to every election with a plan and snacks. He knows how to turn ideology into winning coalitions, and Jackson loved him for it. But now he's the guy who has to clean up Jackson's economic mess. Within weeks of taking office, the Panic of 1837 hits, and it hits hard. Banks fail. Businesses collapse, unemployment skyrockets, cotton prices plummet. You watch as farmers lose their land, shopkeepers board up their windows, and Van Buren calmly insists the federal government should probably do nothing. See, he believes in laissez-faire economics, the idea that the government shouldn't interfere. He thinks the market will correct itself, and federal aid would just create dependency. It's a very principled stance and extremely unpopular. His political opponents start calling him Martin Van Ruin. Ouch. You follow him through long nights at his desk as he tries to invent a solution. The independent treasury system. No more government money in private banks. The feds will handle their own funds directly, thank you very much. It's solid policy eventually, but it doesn't save his presidency. And here's your quirky bedtime fact. Van Buren helped popularize the phrase okay. Seriously. The theory goes that during his campaign, people shortened his nickname Old Kinderhook. He was from Kinderhook, New York, to OK, which became a slogan, then a catchphrase, then, well, the most recognized word on earth. So next time you text OK, you're channeling a Dutch-speaking, panic-handling, mutton-chopped mastermind. Still, Van Buren's calm doesn't cut it. Voters want action, not cool detachment. He loses re-election badly in 1840 to a war hero with a log cabin, a jug of hard cider, and a much louder voice. Historians still argue whether Van Buren was ahead of his time, or just tragically overconfident in the market's ability to heal itself. Was his political brilliance undermined by his economic idealism? Or did he simply inherit too many broken gears from Jackson's machine? You settle deeper now, picturing Van Buren alone on a velvet couch, reading quietly by candlelight while the nation panics outside. He'll try to run again, twice in fact. But the moment has passed. The magician has vanished from the main stage. You're standing in a chilly spring rain, watching a man refuse to wear a coat. William Henry Harrison, the 9th President of the United States, is giving the longest inaugural address in history, 8,445 words, and doing it bareheaded, without gloves, like he's trying to win a dare. Spoiler, he loses. It's 1841. Harrison is a war hero, a frontier legend, and the oldest man elected president up to that point, 68 years old, which was basically ancient in the 1800s. He's also the first president from the Whig Party, and he's determined to prove that the common man doesn't need to be loud and angry like Jackson to get elected. Just battlefield clout and some very aggressive campaign slogans. You probably remember Tippecanoe and Tyler too. It's catchy, it's everywhere. Harrison built his campaign like a Broadway show, log cabins, barrels of hard cider, and carefully manufactured humble vibes, even though he was born into wealth and had no real need for a log cabin. So there he is on Inauguration Day, shivering, delivering an epic speech, ignoring every warning to cut it short or cover up. And within a month, he's dead. Yep. 31 days after taking office, Harrison becomes the first president to die in office, and the shortest-serving president in U.S. history. The cause? Pneumonia, most say, likely worsened by that icy address, though fringe theories suggest it wasn't the rain at all, but tainted water from a White House pipe that flowed downstream from a sewage ditch. That's right. Some historians suspect bad plumbing, not bad weather, sealed Harrison's fate. And just like that, you blink and the man is gone. He didn't have time to sign much legislation, appoint a cabinet, or even put his slippers under the bed. His legacy is a cautionary tale with a punchline. But don't sleep on the chaos he leaves behind. See, no one really knew what to do when a president died. The Constitution said the vice president would assume the duties. But it didn't say if the VP actually became president. Enter John Tyler, his VP, who declares himself fully in charge and locks the title down. It's a bold move, and some folks are furious. But it sets a precedent. If the president dies, the VP doesn't just babysit the office. He inherits it. So while Harrison fades into the fog as a trivia answer and a forehead-slapping reminder to wear a coat, his death rewrites the presidential playbook. His 31 days become the most consequential non-presidency in American history. Here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. During the campaign, Harrison was mocked for being too old and was sarcastically told to sit in a log cabin and drink hard cider. His team turned that insult into a branding bonanza, building fake log cabins at rallies, giving out cider, and selling campaign merchandise like it was a Renaissance fair. Political trolling turned into genius marketing. Historians don't argue over Harrison's policies, because frankly, there weren't any. But they do debate whether the Whigs pushed him too hard, paraded him too long, or simply chose the wrong man to symbolize a movement. You lean back now, the rain still pattering softly in your ears, imagining Harrison walking off stage into the storm, speech still echoing through the marble. 31 days of presidency, one eternal lesson in weatherproof clothing. The crowd is still confused. The punch bowls from Harrison's brief party haven't even been cleared. And now all eyes turn to John Tyler, Virginia aristocrat, former Democrat turned Whig, and the first vice president to ever inherit the presidency. You drift through the parlor of a White House in mourning, where nobody's quite sure if Tyler is acting president or the president. Tyler doesn't wait for clarity. He moves into Harrison's office, takes the oath, and has his mail addressed President John Tyler. Boom. Power claimed. Constitution clarified. Precedent set. But the honeymoon doesn't last. You watch Tyler stroll confidently into the halls of government and promptly start alienating everyone. The Whigs expected him to be a placeholder, a seat filler. Instead, he vetoes their national bank plan twice. Congress tries to pass economic reforms. Tyler slaps them down. One by one, his cabinet members resign in protest until only Daniel Webster remains. Probably out of morbid curiosity, he gets a nickname, his accidency. Not a compliment. You might think he'd flinch at that, but Tyler doesn't. He doubles down, convinced he's doing what's constitutionally right. You can almost admire the stubborn streak, even as it drags his presidency into isolation. His most memorable move, annexing Texas. You lean in as he pushes to make it happen, obsessed with expanding U.S. territory. Texas, then a republic with itchy ambitions, fits perfectly into Tyler's manifest destiny dreams. The annexation is controversial. It'll tip the delicate balance of slave versus free states. But Tyler pushes anyway, and just before leaving office, he gets it done. Texas is in. It doesn't win him much love. He's so unpopular that his own party refuses to nominate him in 1844. He tries forming his own party for a while, basically invites himself to the presidential prom, but nobody really dances with him. And now, your quirky bedtime tidbit. Tyler had 15 children. That's right, more than any other president. His second wife was 30 years younger than him, and one of his grandchildren was still alive well into the 21st century. Think about that. Someone whose grandfather personally knew Abraham Lincoln could have followed you on Instagram. You watch Tyler retreat to his Virginia plantation, Sherwood Forest, with its 300-foot-long hallway, perfect for indoor horse rides apparently. He remains politically active and, in the final twist, joins the Confederacy when the Civil War breaks out. That makes him the only former president to openly side against the United States. When he dies in 1862, his death isn't even acknowledged by Lincoln's administration. No flag at half-mast, no ceremony. Historians still debate Tyler's legacy. Was he a constitutional trailblazer who solidified presidential succession? Or a thin-skinned states rights extremist who steered the country toward deeper division? You drift now past his portrait, half forgotten on the White House wall. His face stares back, not smug, not ashamed, just certain. A president nobody wanted, who made himself permanent anyway. The stage dims for a moment, then flares with sudden urgency. Into the spotlight steps James K. Polk, a man with the charisma of a filing cabinet and the work ethic of an over-caffeinated drill sergeant. You might not know much about him, but by the end of this section, you'll wonder how the guy managed to squeeze a decade's worth of ambition into a single ruthless term. It's 1845. Polk walks into the White House with a 4-point plan and a promise. He'll serve only one term. No re-election drama. No distractions. Just 4 years of pure political steamrolling. His goals: re-establish an independent treasury, reduce tariffs, settle the Oregon boundary with Britain, and, casually grab a big chunk of Mexico while he's at it. You sit in on his meetings and quickly see what sets Polk apart. He keeps every promise. This guy is a human to-do list. He micromanages everything, scribbling memos late into the night by lamplight, rarely laughing, barely sleeping. He treats being president like it's a shift at a factory. and he's the floor manager, accountant, and janitor all at once. First comes Oregon. Tensions with Britain over where the border should be. 54-40 or fight, the slogan goes. But Polk isn't looking for a brawl with Britain. He negotiates a peaceful split at the 49th parallel. No drama, no bloodshed. One item down. Next, Mexico. The real firestorm. Polk sends troops into disputed borderland near the Rio Grande, knowing full well that conflict is likely. And when shots are fired, he marches into Congress and says, essentially, they started it. Congress agrees. War is declared. You follow soldiers through deserts and dusty towns as the U.S. Army sweeps through Mexican territory. General Zachary Taylor becomes a war hero. Winfield Scott marches into Mexico City. By the time it's over, the U.S. has taken what is now California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and more. It's a land grab of historic proportions, wrapped in manifest destiny and draped with moral ambiguity. Polk gets the land. He gets his treasury. He gets his tariff reform. He gets everything. And still, almost nobody likes him. He doesn't trust his own cabinet. He feuds with fellow Democrats. He keeps his wife Sarah as his closest advisor. She bans dancing at the White House, by the way, because even music wasn't safe from this administration's no-nonsense vibe. Here's your quirky bedtime detail. Polk didn't allow work on Sundays, not for religious reasons, but because he figured even God needed a break from his pace. And he had surgery, without anesthesia, as a teenager to remove urinary stones. Just grit, pain, and grim determination. It tracks, doesn't it? Historians still debate Polk's legacy. Was he a visionary who expanded the country with surgical efficiency, or a president who provoked war under false pretenses and left a moral mess for the next generation? One thing's certain. Polk left office exactly as promised. After one term, exhausted, successful, and utterly spent. 3 months later, he was dead. Possibly from overwork. Possibly from the bad water in his new Nashville mansion. Either way, the man who expanded the U.S. by over 1 million square miles burned out faster than any of his peers. You lie back now and imagine him scribbling in his journal one last time, crossing off his final goal with a slow, satisfied sigh. Mission completed, nap time earned. You're squinting now through a dusty battlefield haze, boots caked in mud, muskets gleaming under a harsh southern sun. The next president doesn't enter from a mahogany hallway. He storms in on horseback. Meet Zachary Taylor, hero of the Mexican-American War, reluctant candidate, and perhaps the least political politician to ever wear the title President of the United States. It's 1849. Taylor's just been elected despite the fact that he had never voted before in his life. Not once. Not even for himself. You chuckle as he takes the oath, clearly more comfortable with tents than titles. His entire campaign was built on war hero glow and the warm fuzzies of old Rough and Ready, the nickname he earned for wearing the same rumpled clothes as his men. No uniforms, no formality, just a muddy pair of boots and a scowl that could split stone. But now he's in the White House, which he treats like a military camp. Blunt orders, early risings, and about as much political savvy as a cannonball. He's got strong opinions, especially when it comes to one thing. Slavery expanding into the new territories America just acquired from Mexico. You follow him through heated meetings, where Congress is inching toward open brawls. California wants in as a free state. Southerners are furious. Talk of secession begins to bubble. But Taylor says if anyone tries to leave the Union, he'll lead the army himself. Think about that. a sitting president threatening to personally crush rebellion, with a sword, if need be. Casual. He didn't mince words. He rarely used many at all. And that made everyone a little uneasy. He wasn't quite Whig, wasn't quite Democrat. He refused to be steered or sweet-talked. He was, in a way, Jackson's echo. Military man, blunt force, America first. But unlike Jackson, Taylor lacked the political engine to match the might. And then, after just 16 months in office, the story takes a bizarre turn. It's the 4th of July, 1850. You sit with Taylor on the White House lawn as he devours a big bowl of raw cherries and iced milk under the blazing sun. Hours later, he's sick. Days later, he's dead. The diagnosis? Likely gastroenteritis, possibly from bacteria in the milk or fruit. But of course, rumors swirled. Was he poisoned? Assassinated? In the 1990s, his body was even exhumed and tested for arsenic. None was found. Still, that quirky bedtime mystery lingers like an unsolved riddle. And speaking of quirks, Taylor was so indifferent to image that he once showed up to a presidential event in a farmer's straw hat and muddy boots. Guests were horrified. He just shrugged. That was Taylor. Practical to the point of absurdity. Historians still debate what kind of president he might have become. Was he a secret compromiser with a soldier's heart, or a stubborn stick of dynamite who might have sparked the Civil War a full decade early? You close your eyes now, the sound of distant bugles echoing across the fields of memory. Zachary Taylor doesn't leave behind a grand vision or golden speeches, just a reminder that sometimes a nation gambles on strength and forgets to ask about the stomach. The bugles have fallen silent now, and into the quiet steps a man whose name rarely makes the top 10 list, but who stood briefly at the crossroads of chaos, Millard Fillmore. If Taylor was all dirt and dust, Fillmore is polished oak, buttoned up, deliberate, and eager not to shake the table, even when the table's on fire. It's 1850. President Taylor has just died unexpectedly, and Vice President Fillmore finds himself suddenly in charge. No election, no fanfare. Just a stunned Congress, a nation on edge, and a man with snowy white hair and an expression that screams, "Please stop yelling." You watch as Fillmore takes the reins during a crisis over slavery, so intense it practically hums in the air. The territories gained from the Mexican-American War, Texas, California, Utah, New Mexico, are all asking the same question, slave or free. The balance in the Senate teeters. Southern politicians threaten to secede. Northern ones hiss back, and everyone is clutching the edges of their seats. Fillmore's answer? The Compromise of 1850. 5 laws, carefully packaged, painfully negotiated. He throws his support behind it, even though it splits his own Whig party like a dry branch. California gets to enter as a free state. Utah and New Mexico can decide for themselves. The slave trade is banned in Washington, D.C., but not slavery itself. And the big one, the Fugitive Slave Act, is tightened. Severely. You feel the tension as Fillmore signs it into law. It forces citizens, even in free states, to assist in capturing and returning runaway enslaved people. Federal marshals can arrest fugitives without a jury trial. People are outraged. Abolitionists burn copies in protest. Fillmore, cool and collected, insists it's the price of peace. And here's your quirky bedtime detail. Fillmore installed the first bathtub in the White House. Some say it was a big deal. Others say it was just time. Either way, You picture him taking an anxiety-soaked soak while the country tries not to tear itself in half. He also created the first real White House library, believing a president should be surrounded by books, not just sycophants. You wander the room with him, running your fingers along titles about law, history, geography, each a calm whisper in the storm. But compromise buys only time. Fillmore tries to ride the middle ground, but in doing so, loses support from both sides. The Whigs fracture beyond repair. He's denied his party's nomination in 1852, so he tries again in 1856. With a new party, the Know-Nothings. Yes, they were real. Yes, the name was that on the nose. Their platform was largely anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, and not well remembered for good reasons. Historians still argue whether Fillmore was a pragmatist keeping the Union afloat, or a president so fixated on calm that he smoothed over injustice with a polite shrug. Was he delaying disaster, or just helping it fester? You drift now into a flickering lamplight, the soft rustle of law books around you, and the quiet sigh of a man who desperately wanted to hold things together, even as the cracks began to spread beneath his feet. The lamplight flickers, and the shadows deepen as a tall, painfully handsome man takes center stage, Franklin Pierce, the 14th president, whose life reads like a Shakespearean tragedy wrapped in a campaign poster. It's 1853. Pierce steps into the White House looking like a romantic hero, chin perfectly sculpted, hair immaculately parted. But behind those smoldering eyes, deep grief, heavy loss, and a presidency soaked in regret. You start this chapter not in the Oval Office, but on a snowy train ride just before the inauguration. Pierce, his wife Jane, and their last surviving son, Benjamin, are traveling to Washington. The train derails. Their son is killed right in front of them. Pierce and Jane survive, but they are shattered. Jane retreats from public life almost entirely, wearing mourning black throughout his presidency. Pierce is sworn in with no smile, no celebration, just a void where joy used to live. He doesn't swear on a Bible. He affirms on a law book, the only president to do so. And you can almost hear the somber oath ringing off the Capitol walls like a funeral bell. But Pierce doesn't get a quiet term to grieve. The country is boiling again. Slavery debates are burning up the West. And now he's handed the Kansas-Nebraska Act. You walk beside him as he signs it, probably his biggest mistake. The act allows settlers in those territories to vote on whether to allow slavery, effectively gutting the Missouri Compromise. It sounds democratic. It's a trap. Almost immediately, pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces rush into Kansas. Towns are torched. People are beaten, murdered. The territory earns a new name, Bleeding Kansas. Pierce, instead of de-escalating, throws his weight behind the pro-slavery side. He calls abolitionists troublemakers, sends federal troops to enforce order, but only for one side. His popularity plummets like a brick. Even his own party begins to edge away from him like a friend making an awkward exit from a bad dinner party. And here's your quirky bedtime detail. Pierce was arrested during his presidency for running over an elderly woman with a horse. Charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, but still, not a great look. Also, he was known to drink. A lot. Though he reportedly abstained during his term, after leaving office, he is believed to have returned to the bottle with tragic enthusiasm. Oh, and when asked about losing the Democratic nomination in 1856, Pierce reportedly quipped, "There is nothing left to do but get drunk." One of the darker presidential mic drops in history. He leaves office reviled, not even invited to his successor's inauguration. His wife never forgives Washington, and when the Civil War breaks out, Pierce, though personally opposed to secession, criticizes Lincoln and sympathizes with the South. By the time he dies in 1869, few mourners attend. He's buried quietly in New Hampshire. His legacy, a fog of what if and oh no. Historians still debate whether Pierce was simply too broken by grief to govern, or whether his indecisiveness and sympathy for Southern slaveholders helped tip the country toward disaster. Was he doomed by fate, or just a man too weak for his moment? Now you lie back as the fire crackles low, and the image of Franklin Pierce fades like smoke. Beautiful, tragic, and forgotten far too quickly. You feel it now, a slow, uneasy shift. The twilight of compromise is fading, and the cold wind of crisis is rising. Enter James Buchanan, the 15th president, a lifelong bachelor, a lifelong politician, and quite possibly the most unfortunate placeholder in presidential history. It's 1857. Buchanan is 70, silver-haired, and deeply confident that his decades of service as senator, diplomat, and Secretary of State have prepared him for anything. You watch him stride into the White House like a man arriving at his final promotion. He doesn't know yet that the nation is already splitting beneath his polished shoes. And here's the punch. He says it himself in his inaugural address, that the question of slavery in the territories is, happily, a matter of little practical importance. You blink. You look at Kansas. You look at Congress. You wonder what newspapers he's been reading. Almost immediately, Buchanan gets entangled in the Dred Scott case. The Supreme Court is about to rule on whether enslaved people can sue for freedom. Before the decision is announced, Buchanan quietly nudges justices from the bench. He wants a sweeping verdict, and he gets it. The court declares that black Americans, free or enslaved, have no rights under the Constitution. The ruling sends shockwaves through the North and triumph through the South. You watch as Buchanan nods in grim satisfaction, thinking the issue is settled, but instead it throws gasoline on the fire. Northern abolitionists rage. Southern leaders feel emboldened, and Buchanan, ever the constitutional purist, does nothing. Time and again, he insists the president cannot act. When violence erupts in Kansas, he dithers. When southern states begin seceding, starting with South Carolina, he declares they have no legal right to leave, but that he also has no power to stop them. You can almost hear the country scream, then what can you do? And now, your quirky bedtime tidbit. Buchanan had a peculiar habit of tilting his head sharply to one side. It wasn't a political pose. It was from a condition called torticollis, or wry neck. You picture him writing letters with a stiff sideways nod, as if perpetually puzzled by the collapsing union around him. Also, he was the only lifelong bachelor to become president. His niece, Harriet Lane, served as First Lady, and by all accounts she was beloved, charming, elegant, a sharp contrast to Buchanan's buttoned-up stiffness. She hosted vibrant White House events even as the Capitol trembled with uncertainty. Buchanan hoped history would vindicate him. He even wrote a massive memoir defending every decision. But when Abraham Lincoln finally takes office, the country is already fractured. 11 states soon secede. And Buchanan? He quietly returns to Pennsylvania, where the locals hang him in effigy. Historians still argue over just how responsible he was for the Civil War. Was he paralyzed by legalism, complicit in Southern aggression, or just the wrong man at the worst possible moment? You settle into silence now, wrapped in shadows and smoke, imagining Buchanan standing alone at his window, watching the Union unravel, believing he had done his duty even as the foundation cracked beneath his feet. The sky darkens now, not just in your dream, but in the nation's soul. Through the storm steps a tall, rail-thin man in a stovepipe hat, with sad eyes and a voice like worn leather. Abraham Lincoln, 16th president, and the one whose shadow still stretches over everything that came before, and everything that would follow. It's 1861. 7 states have already seceded. The Union is bleeding before the first shots even fired. And here comes Lincoln, barely known outside of Illinois, mocked for his looks, his backwards upbringing, his awkward speaking style. But you listen to him now, and it's all there. Conviction, clarity, and just enough homespun metaphor to lull a country out of its panic. You walk with him through the dark halls of the White House as he tries, at first, not to provoke. He refuses to recognize secession. He refuses to start the war. But when Confederate cannons fire on Fort Sumter, he doesn't flinch. He calls for troops. The Civil War begins. It's like nothing the country has ever seen. Brothers fight brothers. Towns burn. Letters home are soaked in ink and blood. And Lincoln? He bears it all quietly, constantly, with shoulders that seem to get heavier by the day. He writes letters he'll never send. He walks the White House halls at night, alone. You can almost hear the creak of his boots as he passes under flickering gas lamps, wondering if he'll make it through the week. His cabinet is full of rivals, men who wanted his job, who think he's unqualified. But he listens, learns, outlasts them all. And yet, amid the carnage, he changes the meaning of the war. It begins as a fight to preserve the Union. But soon, it's about freedom, emancipation. You're there as he drafts the Emancipation Proclamation. It doesn't free all enslaved people, not yet. Only those in rebel states. But it shifts the war's soul. Now it's not just about saving a country. It's about transforming it. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Lincoln was a champion wrestler. Seriously. He had over 300 matches and lost only once. His gangly arms and towering frame made him formidable in the ring. And somehow, that scrappy persistence followed him right into the presidency. Also, he had a dream, several, in fact, about his own death. Days before he was assassinated, he told his cabinet of a dream where he wandered the White House and found mourners gathered around a coffin. "Who is dead?" he asked. "The president," someone whispered. On April 14th, 1865, just 5 days after the Civil War officially ended, Lincoln attends a play at Ford's Theatre. You sit quietly in the box seat beside him, watching the flickering lights of the stage. Then a gunshot. Then silence. His assassination by John Wilkes Booth sends shockwaves around the world. He becomes a martyr, a symbol, a carved mountain face. But in those final years, he was just a man, devoted, exhausted, and more eloquent in grief than most are in victory. Historians still debate what Lincoln might have done during Reconstruction. Would he have united the country faster? Could he have prevented the bitterness that followed? No one knows. But he left behind the Gettysburg Address, the second inaugural, and a legacy rooted not in perfection, but in perseverance. You close your eyes now, and you're back in Springfield, Illinois, beside a wooden coffin and a nation draped in black. And as the train whistles into the distance, you realize the war may be over, but the hard part hasn't even started. You wake to the hum of Reconstruction, but it's a fragile, discordant tune, like trying to rebuild a house during a lightning storm. And at the helm stands Andrew Johnson, a tailor by trade, thrust into the presidency after Lincoln's assassination. You can almost see the threads he tries to sew, but none of them hold. It's 1865. The Civil War is over. Slavery is abolished. But the wounds are fresh and deep, and the Union isn't so much restored as duct taped together. Johnson, a Southern Democrat who stayed loyal to the Union, is now in charge of reuniting a country that hates itself in two directions. You follow him through his first speeches, defensive, bitter, full of jabs. Johnson doesn't do inspiration. He does indignation. He believes he's the true protector of the Constitution, but his methods are blunt, his tone condescending, and his compromises non-existent. His plan for Reconstruction, quick and easy reintegration of the Southern states, without safeguards for the formerly enslaved. Congress, led by the so-called radical Republicans, wants new civil rights protections, strong federal oversight, and slow, careful reintegration. Johnson wants none of it. He vetoes their proposals. Over and over. Congress fights back. They override his vetoes, over a dozen times. It's a legislative slugfest, and you're sitting front row as tempers boil over. And here comes your quirky bedtime tidbit. Johnson gave his inauguration speech as vice president while drunk. He slurred his words, shouted at people, and had to be physically pulled away from the podium. It was so bad, Lincoln reportedly said, "I need a drink myself." Back in the White House, Johnson digs in. He tries to fire Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a Lincoln loyalist and key radical Republican ally. But Congress had passed a law just for this reason, saying he couldn't do that without their approval. Johnson ignores it. Fires Stanton anyway. That's the final straw. He becomes the first president in U.S. history to be impeached. The charges? Violating the Tenure of Office Act and a whole list of political sins. You watch the Senate trial unfold. Tension thick as velvet. In the end, he's acquitted. By one vote. One single vote keeps him from being removed. Still, he's politically dead. He doesn't win renomination. His party ditches him like a bad wedding DJ. Historians still debate. Was Johnson a principled defender of the Constitution, refusing to let Congress dominate the presidency? Or was he a Southern sympathizer who torpedoed civil rights progress and emboldened the worst elements of the post-war South? You watch him slink back to Tennessee, where, fun fact, he makes a bizarre comeback, winning a Senate seat in 1875. He's the only former president to return to Congress after his presidency. But he dies just months after being sworn in. It's like he got the last word, and then fell silent. As you lay back into your pillow, you feel the riff still echoing. Freedom newly won, but justice barely begun. And in that uneasy pause between war and progress, you hear the soft click of a tailor's scissors, cutting through fabric that no longer fits. You wake to the slow, methodical step of a soldier in civilian clothes. The smoke of war has lifted, but the scars remain. And now, the quiet general who helped win the war is expected to heal the peace. Welcome to the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant, a man whose silences speak louder than most speeches. It's 1869. Grant is famous across the nation. The Union's bulldog commander, the man who took Vicksburg, chased down Lee and stood stoic at Appomattox. He's never held elected office before. He's barely comfortable at podiums. But the people trust him, and for a brief moment, that feels like enough. You walk beside him into the White House. Grant doesn't come from money. He's not eloquent, but he is honest and tired, so tired. You can see it in the way he fidgets with his gloves, always more at ease on a horse than at a desk. He immediately confronts the colossal mess of Reconstruction. The South is smoldering. The newly freed Black Americans face terror from all directions, and white supremacist groups, especially the Ku Klux Klan, are rising like smoke in the dark. So Grant acts. He pushes for the 15th Amendment, securing voting rights regardless of race. He signs enforcement acts that let federal troops arrest Klan members. He sends in the military, and for a while, it works. You watch as he battles not just racism, but exhaustion itself, the fatigue of a nation that wants to move on, even when justice hasn't arrived yet. But while Grant fights nobly for civil rights, his administration becomes a magnet for corruption. Not from him, he's personally honest to a fault, but from the men around him. His loyalty is his greatest weakness. He trusts old friends, even when they're lining their pockets. Scandal after scandal erupts like political firecrackers. The credit mobilier fraud, the whiskey ring, the Indian ring. You sit in the corner of the cabinet room while Grant glares at reports. Too often a step behind, too reluctant to believe his allies are betraying him. His response is always slow, always too gentle, always an echo, not a shout. And now, your quirky bedtime tidbit. Grant loved fast horses. He was once ticketed for speeding in Washington, D.C., with a horse and buggy. The officer didn't even realize who he was at first. Grant reportedly tipped his hat, accepted the charge, and paid the fine. Presidential accountability, buggy style. Also, he smoked cigars. A lot of cigars. Like 20 a day. After the Civil War, grateful citizens sent him over 10,000 cigars as gifts. Not exactly great for his health. He later died of throat cancer. Historians still puzzle over him. Was he an underrated civil rights champion dragged down by political naivety? Or a wartime genius simply miscast in peacetime? In his post-presidency, Grant writes a memoir, while dying, just to provide for his family. You picture him, thin and grey, scribbling between coughing fits. His words are beautiful. Mark Twain helps publish them. They sell like wildfire. He dies days after finishing. And now, as the night deepens, you hear the soft clink of medals, the rustle of epaulets removed for good. Grant didn't give grand speeches. He didn't smile much. But in his silence was a kind of grace, the weary grace of a man who saw too much war and tried, with trembling hands, to build peace. You're stepping now into a smoke-filled room, where backdoor deals hum louder than campaign speeches. The election of 1876 is so messy, so absurdly contested, that it makes hanging chads look like kindergarten squabbles. And in the middle of it all emerges a man with a beard, a Bible, and a reputation for decency. Rutherford B. Hayes. It's 1807. Hayes doesn't even know if he's going to be president until just 2 days before the inauguration. You're there as Congress sorts through disputed electoral votes like a family fighting over a will. In the end, a deal is struck. The Compromise of 1807. Democrats agree to give Hayes the presidency. If he agrees to pull federal troops out of the South, you feel that quiet moment of dread, because those troops were the last fragile thread holding Reconstruction together. Hayes becomes president, but at a cost. His very first act, removing the soldiers who'd been protecting black voters and elected officials in the post-war South, triggers a collapse of civil rights gains. Almost immediately, white supremacist governments return to power across the South. The Klan resurges. Voter suppression becomes the norm. And Black Americans are left defenseless, abandoned by the government that had once promised to protect them. Hayes, to his credit, hates the deal. He believes in equality. He condemns violence. But he sticks to the compromise anyway, trying, perhaps naively, to restore national unity by sacrificing the most vulnerable. You sit with him late at night as he writes in his journal and stares at the ceiling fan. A deeply religious man, he truly wants to be good. But sometimes being good isn't enough. He advocates for civil service reform, trying to break the spoils system that let presidents reward political supporters with cushy jobs. Instead of hiring based on loyalty, he wants a merit-based system. It's slow, it's unpopular, but it's the seed of a cleaner government. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Hayes was the first president to have a typewriter in the White House. He also banned alcohol. His wife Lucy, dubbed Lemonade Lucy, famously hosted dry state dinners. The punch bowl was replaced with lemonade. Cheers, I guess. He also installed the first telephone in the executive mansion. The phone number? Just one. Makes you wonder who had two. Historians still debate the Hayes Compromise. Was it a betrayal of Reconstruction, or the only realistic path forward? Did he preserve the Union, or abandon its soul? Hayes serves only one term, as promised. He returns to Ohio, champions education, supports prison reform, and quietly fades into history's back pocket. But the door he closed, Reconstruction, is one the country wouldn't reopen for nearly a century. You lie back now and feel the press of decisions made in smoky rooms, the echo of soldiers marching away for the last time. And in the quiet, Hayes's soft voice carries forward, kind, cautious, uncertain. He wanted healing, but sometimes healing too soon just lets the wound fester. You blink and the candlelight sharpens, just long enough to catch a glimpse of James A. Garfield, a president so brief and brilliant that history barely had time to pin a number to his name before tragedy swallowed it. It's 1881. Garfield has just taken the oath, and already you sense the tension. He's not your average party stooge. He's a scholar, a Civil War general, and a man who reads ancient Greek for fun. You watch him doodling calculus problems during cabinet meetings. Seriously. He's got the mind of a professor and the spine of a general, and the second he steps into office, he starts stepping on toes. Garfield refuses to play the patronage game. He battles with the stalwarts, a faction of his own Republican Party who believe in handing out government jobs like candy. Their ringleader? Senator Roscoe Conkling. You follow Garfield as he outmaneuvers Conkling in a battle over the New York Customs House. Yes, it sounds boring, but it was basically the ATM of political power back then. And just as he's gaining momentum, reforming civil service, strengthening the presidency, challenging entrenched corruption, he's shot. July 2nd, 1881. You're there at the Baltimore and Potomac train station in Washington, D.C. Garfield is walking toward a train when a deranged office seeker named Charles Guiteau shoots him twice. One bullet grazes his arm, the other lodges deep near his spine. But Garfield doesn't die immediately. Here's where it gets even darker. The bullet doesn't kill him, the doctors do. You hover in his sick room for 11 weeks, watching as physicians prod his wound with unwashed fingers and metal tools, ignoring advice to sterilize anything. One even punctures Garfield's liver by accident. They can't find the bullet, so they poke around blindly. Alexander Graham Bell. Yes, the telephone guy. Tries to use a homemade metal detector to locate it. It fails because no one told him Garfield was lying on a metal bed frame. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Garfield could write Greek with one hand and Latin with the other, at the same time. A presidential party trick, yes, but one that perfectly sums up how much potential he had before fate crashed the curtain down. Finally, on September 19th, Garfield dies from infection and internal hemorrhaging. He'd only served 200 days, barely 6 months. The nation goes into mourning. The man who might have reshaped the office, elevated its moral core, and untangled the knots of corruption never got the chance. Historians still debate what Garfield's presidency might have become. Was he destined to be a civil service crusader, a transformative executive, or would the political machinery of the time have chewed him up anyway? We'll never know. You sit now in the silence of that long, fevered summer. Crickets outside, bloodstains inside. And picture a man who never asked to be president, but who might have been one of the best. And as the train station fades into darkness, you wonder how many more destinies were lost to bad medicine, petty politics, and one man's delusion. The curtains haven't even cooled from the funeral when Chester A. Arthur, yes, that Chester A. Arthur, steps into the Oval Office. Nobody expects much. He's been called a dandy, a spoilsman, a man better suited for dinner parties than democracy. But you follow him in, and to everyone's surprise, including probably his own, he starts to clean house. It's 1881. Arthur was Garfield's vice president, chosen solely to appease the stalwarts, the very faction Garfield fought against. He'd never held elective office. He once oversaw the New York Customs House, dishing out patronage jobs like candy at a parade. Even reformers called him corrupt. His nickname? The gentleman boss. And now he's president. You expect disaster. So does the press. One New York paper says, Arthur will never be anything but Arthur. But then, something shifts. You walk with him through the White House, refurbished under his watch with Tiffany glass, fresh furniture, and a flair for velvet and detail. He throws out cartloads of dusty junk left behind by predecessors. Symbolic, perhaps, of how he's clearing his own name. Then he does the unthinkable. He embraces civil service reform. The nation is reeling from Garfield's assassination. The shooter claimed he did it for political patronage. The whole system is under fire. So Arthur signs the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, establishing that federal jobs should be awarded based on merit, not political loyalty. It's the biggest reform of its kind in American history at that point. You picture Arthur, silk cravat, mutton chops glowing under gaslight, sitting at his desk, signing away the very system that made his career. It's almost poetic, quiet, unshowy, and shockingly brave. But not everything shines. Arthur vetoes a Chinese exclusion bill in 1882, recognizing it as unjust and unconstitutional. Congress overrides him with a revised version. It becomes law, the first major restriction on immigration in U.S. history, and a dark foreshadowing of policies to come. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Arthur was obsessed with fashion. He reportedly owned over 80 pairs of pants, changed clothes multiple times per day, and refused to leave his room until everything matched. He even hired a valet solely to help with wardrobe coordination. Imagine a president today with a full-time outfit curator. He also rarely worked before 10 a.m., preferred staying up past midnight, and took long evening walks around D.C. You tag along as he strolls silently through the fog, hands behind his back, thinking about how strange it all turned out. But beneath the velvet and varnish, something else is happening. He's sick, very sick. Arthur suffers from Bright's disease, a fatal kidney ailment he keeps secret. His energy wanes, his cheeks hollow. He doesn't run for re-election in 1884. Instead, he quietly steps aside, knowing his time is almost up. Historians still debate his transformation. Was Arthur always principled deep down, waiting for a moment to act? Or was he simply the right man at the right time, moved by tragedy and public pressure? You rest now in the flickering shadow of a man who entered office unloved, unexpected, and unbeautiful in the public eye, only to leave behind a legacy far more dignified than anyone had dared to predict. The fog clears to reveal something unusual. The same man entering the White House twice, but not in a row. Meet Grover Cleveland, America's 22nd and 24th president. Yes, he gets 2 numbers. No, it doesn't mean he gets 2 birthdays. It's 1885, and Cleveland is a Democrat in a sea of Republicans, the first from his party to win the presidency since before the Civil War. He didn't charm his way in with speeches or war stories. He did it with stubbornness. You walk beside him as he stomps through the bureaucracy, like a man who just wants people to follow the rules. He's a reformer, but not flashy, a fiscal conservative, but not cruel. He vetoes hundreds of bills, including private pension requests for Civil War veterans. His reasoning? Many were fraudulent or poorly written. Some say principled, others say heartless. You sit with him in his study as he signs veto after veto, mumbling, "I must maintain the integrity of the government." Integrity was his North Star. He even said, "A public office is a public trust." Imagine that on a bumper sticker today. Now your quirky bedtime tidbit. Cleveland was the only US president to get married in the White House. The bride? Frances Folsom, 21 years old, stylish, and half his age. He was 49. She'd been the daughter of Cleveland's close friend, and after her father died, Cleveland became her legal guardian. Yes, that part always makes people pause. Despite the raised eyebrows, the public adored her. She was witty, charming, and photogenic. Basically, the Beyoncé of the Gilded Age. But political life wasn't easy. Cleveland opposed free silver, a movement to inflate currency by coining more silver dollars, which farmers and laborers loved. He stood by the gold standard, upsetting his party's populist wing. In 1888, he lost re-election. Not by popular vote, he won that, but through the Electoral College. You watch him quietly pack his things and leave, a little stunned. 4 years later, in 1892, he returns like a stubborn boomerang. The economy is crashing. The panic of 1893 hits. Banks fail, unemployment soars, strikes break out. Cleveland, back in office, doubles down on conservative economic principles. He refuses to expand the money supply, refuses to offer large-scale government aid. His response is to repeal the Sherman Silver Purchase Act and send troops to break up the Pullman strike. It works economically, but politically, a disaster. Labor unions call him a traitor. The Democratic Party begins to split between gold standard conservatives and free silver populists. You're watching a man who won on trust suddenly become the most unpopular president of his time. By the end of his second term, nobody's inviting him to dinner. And yet, Cleveland remains unbothered. He leaves office in 1897 with the same stubborn dignity he brought in, disliked by many, admired by few, but always consistent. Historians still debate his impact. Was Cleveland a courageous fiscal realist who kept America grounded? Or a cold, overly rigid leader who missed a chance to help the people when they needed it most? You curl into the quiet of history, picturing that rare moment, a man walking away from the presidency only to come back again. Not for ego, not for revenge, just because he thought the country still needed a firm, boring hand on the wheel. You hear the rustle of whiskers before you see the man, Benjamin Harrison, the bearded bookend between Grover Cleveland's 2 terms and the 23rd President of the United States. Grandson of William Henry Harrison, the guy with the tragic 31-day term, Benjamin steps into office with more political chops and a much longer lifespan. It's 1889. Cleveland is out, Harrison is in, and America is changing fast. You walk alongside him as the Industrial Revolution picks up steam, factories belching smoke, cities booming, tycoons stacking money like cordwood. The Gilded Age is glinting with gold on the surface, and grime just underneath. Harrison is quiet, stiff, and profoundly organized. He gives meticulous speeches, every word weighed like gold dust. He loves policy, statistics, and legal nuance. The people, less so. He's not warm, not exactly cuddly. One journalist said he had the charm of a dry lunch. You can practically hear the formality in his footsteps. But his presidency is far from dull. First, he signs the Sherman Antitrust Act, America's first federal attempt to rein in monopolies. The big trusts, Standard Oil, railroads, sugar barons, are getting too powerful, too cozy with politicians. Harrison draws a line. It's not aggressively enforced at first, but the law plants a seed that will later bloom into full-blown trust-busting. Next comes the McKinley tariff, a sky-high protective tariff meant to shield American industries. It pleases factory owners, angers farmers, and spikes consumer prices. You hear it debated everywhere, from cigar lounges to grain silos. And then, he presides over the billion-dollar Congress. For the first time, the federal government spends over $1 billion in a single session. Veterans' pensions, naval expansion, infrastructure, all important. But critics scream about fiscal recklessness. The Treasury surplus is gone, they cry, and it's true. The budget vanishes into progress like water into desert sand. Here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Harrison was the first president to have electric lights installed in the White House, but he and his wife were afraid to touch the light switches, so they'd just leave the lights on or have a servant do the switching. Imagine inventing electricity and still losing sleep because of it. He also expanded America's global presence, advocating for a modern navy, hosting the first Pan-American Conference, and setting the stage for future overseas influence. Not flashy empire building, but the gentle start of a louder foreign policy. But Harrison's popularity tanks. The high tariffs hurt consumers. The big spending worries conservatives. And Cleveland comes roaring back in 1892 to win a rare rematch. You watch Harrison pack his desk quietly, his wife Caroline, dying of tuberculosis even as election returns roll in. He loses the presidency and the love of his life in the same season. Historians often ask, was Harrison just a placeholder, wedged between two Grovers? Or was he a surprisingly modern president, pushing for a stronger federal government, a more assertive economy, and a more muscular state? You lie back now, the hum of electric light barely flickering in your ears, and imagine Harrison staring into the filament glow, knowing he moved the country forward. even if few would remember how. The curtain rises on a calm, well-dressed figure, standing beneath the crisp, unfurled flags of a confident empire in the making. William McKinley, the 25th president, isn't loud. He's not flashy. But beneath that soft Ohio drawl and silk-lined waistcoat is a man about to oversee America's transformation from a sleepy republic into a global power. It's 1897. The economy is recovering. Gold wins the day over silver. And McKinley, measured, polite, and obsessively detail-oriented, is the man holding the reins. You walk beside him into a new century, one that hums with expansion, electricity, and the thrum of overseas ambition. McKinley believes in business. He's pro-tariff, pro-growth, pro-industry. But unlike his predecessors, he's also got impeccable political instincts. He listens, he smiles, he shakes hands everywhere. The man once reportedly shook 50 hands a minute. That's not just PR, that's cardio. But the peace doesn't last long. Trouble brews in Cuba, where Spanish colonial rule is collapsing into violence. American newspapers, locked in a circulation war, splash headlines soaked in blood. Real or exaggerated? You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war, one publisher allegedly boasts. And soon, a war arrives. In 1898, the USS Maine explodes in Havana Harbor. The cause? Probably a boiler fire. But newspapers scream, Spanish sabotage. The public demands action. And McKinley, reluctantly, after much hesitation, asks Congress for war. You sail with him into the Spanish-American War. It's short, it's chaotic, and it's oddly successful. Spain is defeated in mere months. Cuba gains independence, sort of. The US acquires Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Just like that, America has an empire. Some celebrate it as destiny. Others decry it as hypocrisy. After all, wasn't this the nation born from rejecting empire? And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. McKinley was a devout Methodist who reportedly wrestled with the morality of annexing the Philippines. He said he prayed on it and decided it was America's duty to educate, uplift, and civilize the islands. This quote gets cited and mocked for years, since the Filipinos didn't exactly ask to be uplifted at gunpoint. The Philippine-American War follows, longer, bloodier, and far more brutal than the Spanish-American one. It's a grim chapter, full of guerrilla warfare and mounting casualties. McKinley never fully addresses its toll. You watch him, calm and confident, deflecting criticism with that same quiet poise. History, however, doesn't forget. At home, the economy booms. New states join the Union. He wins re-election easily in 1900 with a new young vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, bursting with energy and impatience. Then comes Buffalo, September 1901. McKinley is at the Pan American Exposition, shaking hands with admirers. A man named Leon Czolgosz steps forward with a pistol wrapped in a handkerchief. 2 shots. Panic. Blood. McKinley's first words, "Be careful how you tell my wife." Doctors operate, but they can't find the bullet. Infection sets in. Gangrene spreads. McKinley dies 8 days later. Roosevelt is sworn in. And the 20th century truly begins. Historians debate whether McKinley was a cautious mastermind, guiding America's rise with velvet gloves, or simply a gentle man caught in the machinery of larger forces. Was he leading or being led? You settle now beneath the glow of a World's Fair, electric lights blinking over cotton candy and brass bands, where a quiet president stood still, just long enough for history to catch up and knock him down. The brass bands fade, and suddenly everything moves faster. You feel it in your heartbeat, in the pounding boots, in the crack of a riding crop against the dust. Into the arena charges Theodore Roosevelt, a man who speaks in exclamation points, thinks in all caps, and lives like history is a competition he intends to win. It's 1901. McKinley is dead. Roosevelt, only 42, becomes the youngest president in American history. He was vice president for barely 6 months. Now he's sprinting up the steps of the White House like it's his own personal national park. You try to keep up. Roosevelt doesn't walk, he strides. He doesn't deliberate, he charges. His voice booms, his teeth gleam. He boxes in the basement of the White House and loses sight in one eye from a punch. He owns a small zoo's worth of pets, including a badger. He once gave a 90-minute speech after being shot, because it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. This is not a man who naps. But it's not just bluster. Roosevelt uses the presidency like a sledgehammer and a megaphone. He expands executive power, shaping the modern presidency with sheer will. He calls it the bully pulpit, a platform to speak directly to the people. You sit beside him in meetings where he cracks down on monopolies, suing railroads, oil barons, and meat packers. He enforces the Sherman Antitrust Act like no one before him, earning the nickname Trust Buster. But he's strategic. He doesn't hate business. He just wants it fair and accountable. And speaking of meatpacking, he reads The Jungle by Upton Sinclair and nearly gags. So he pushes for the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. No more mystery meat. No more unregulated health tonics laced with opium. Thanks, Teddy. Then comes nature. Roosevelt loves nature. Birds, bears, trees, big rocks, you name it. He establishes 5 national parks, 18 national monuments, 150 national forests. You watch him scribble an executive order protecting Grand Canyon lands as if swatting away land developers like mosquitoes. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Roosevelt once delivered a speech while a tiny dog he brought with him chased a cat across the stage. He laughed, shrugged, and kept talking. That's the energy. Internationally, he builds the Panama Canal, a massive engineering feat that shortens shipping routes, but also involves a you blinked we backed a revolution maneuver in Panama. Not subtle. Very Roosevelt. He also wins the Nobel Peace Prize for mediating the Russo-Japanese War. Yes, the same man who loved battles, big game hunts, and bare-knuckle politics wins a Peace Prize. And somehow, it fits. In 1904, he wins election in his own right, easily, but he promises not to run again in 1908. Big mistake. He handpicks William Howard Taft as his successor, thinking Taft will keep the energy going. But Taft's more of a legalist than a charger. Roosevelt gets restless, frustrated. In 1912, he runs again, under the Progressive Bull Moose Party. He splits the Republican vote. Taft flounders. Woodrow Wilson wins. Historians still debate Roosevelt's legacy. Was he a brilliant progressive who brought energy and reform to the Oval Office? Or a power-hungry egotist who bent the Constitution to his will? You lie back now under the high, pine-scented skies of Roosevelt's America, a country newly awake, wild-eyed, louder, faster, more ambitious, and you can almost hear him whisper through the trees and headlines, get action, do things, be sane, don't fritter. The dust from Roosevelt's whirlwind presidency hasn't even settled when in waddles William Howard Taft. Big, gentle, deliberate. If Roosevelt was a charging bison, Taft is a thoughtful elephant, one step at a time, carefully, properly. It's 1909. The progressive flame is still flickering, but Taft, he prefers legal briefs to bullhorns. You watch him take the oath, his hand steady, his moustache impeccable. He's the 27th president, but he never really wanted the job. What he wanted was to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The law is his first love. Politics, more like a polite conversation he wishes would end. Taft is big, very big, over 300 pounds. And yes, here comes the quirky bedtime tidbit you've probably been waiting for. The bathtub. Legend says he got stuck in one and had to be pried out. In truth, he had a custom oversized tub installed, 7 feet long, big enough for 4 people. For context, he used it solo. Somewhere between history and exaggeration, the story became irresistible. But Taft's term isn't just about plumbing. He continues some of Roosevelt's antitrust policies, more lawsuits against monopolies actually, but he does it with less flair. He's methodical, legalistic. He believes in the process, not the publicity. You trail him into the halls of tariff reform. It's supposed to be a minor tweak, a campaign promise. But the resulting Payne-Aldrich tariff raises rates instead of lowering them, infuriating progressives and fueling the perception that Taft is too cozy with conservatives. Even Roosevelt, lounging somewhere in Africa with a rifle and a rhino horn, hears the uproar. Then Taft fires Gifford Pinchot, Roosevelt's beloved conservationist buddy, in a scandal over public land. That's it. The Roosevelt-Taft bromance is dead. The party splits like dry firewood. In 1912, Roosevelt challenges him for the Republican nomination. Taft wins the nod, but Roosevelt storms out, forms the Bull Moose Party, and runs third party. The Republican vote splits. Woodrow Wilson slides into the presidency. Taft, he's humiliated. You watch him leave office, shoulders slumped, tie askew. He only carries 2 states. Even his home state of Ohio votes against him. It's one of the worst electoral losses ever for a sitting president. But Taft doesn't fade. In fact, he gets his wish. In 1921, President Harding appoints him Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It's the only job he ever truly loved. You sit in the corner of the courtroom as he beams from the bench. He writes decisions with the satisfaction of a man finally home. He even says, "I don't remember that I was ever president." Historians still debate Taft's presidency. Was he a cautious reformer undone by party politics? A good man trapped in the wrong job? Or simply a jurist trying to make order in a chaotic moment? You rest now in the shadow of marble columns and constitutional clauses, where Taft quietly reshaped the judicial branch while the presidency receded in his rearview mirror. He didn't shout, he didn't charge. But when he finally got where he was meant to be, he smiled. You float now into the era of chalkboards, cufflinks, and caution. Meet Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president, a former college professor who governed like he was grading the world's most stressful group project. It's 1913, and the United States is perched uneasily on the edge of modernity. And Wilson, bookish, brilliant, and brittle, is holding the syllabus. You watch him step into the Oval Office, soft-spoken but stern. He's the first Southern-born president since before the Civil War, and the first with a PhD. He believes deeply in order, morality, and ideas. Big ones, dangerous ones, inspiring ones. He doesn't just do politics. He tries to define it. First, Domestic reform. You follow him through a flurry of progressive legislation. The Federal Reserve Act, which creates the central banking system we still use today. The Federal Trade Commission. The Clayton Antitrust Act. He lowers tariffs and introduces the first federal income tax via the 16th Amendment. He's not just rearranging furniture, he's remodeling the house. But Wilson's presidency is more than policy. It's a paradox. He expands democracy, supporting labor rights, cracking down on child labor, and introducing reforms to regulate the market. But he also resegregates the federal government, placing black workers in separate offices, bathrooms, and cafeterias. Civil rights leaders beg him to reverse course. He refuses. You sit beside them in frustration, watching this moralist professor preach justice with one hand and enforce racism with the other. And then the world goes to war. In 1914, Europe descends into chaos. Trenches, gas, barbed wire. Wilson keeps America out, promising neutrality. He campaigns in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And then, in 1917, he brings us in. Why? Germany resumes unrestricted submarine warfare. The infamous Zimmermann telegram. Germany asking Mexico to join the war against the US. Tips public opinion. Wilson asks Congress to declare war to make the world safe for democracy. You hear that phrase echo for 100 years. The US enters World War I. Wilson expands government power. The military draft returns. Propaganda ramps up. Dissent is criminalized. The Espionage and Sedition Act silence critics. Free speech suffers under the banner of unity. The war ends in 1918. America's role is decisive. And now Wilson has a new dream, the League of Nations, a global body to prevent future wars. You walk beside him in Paris as he pushes his 14 points, drafts the Treaty of Versailles, and envisions a new world order. But back home, the Senate revolts. Led by Henry Cabot Lodge, opponents fear entangling alliances. They block ratification. The US never joins the League. Wilson is devastated. Then, disaster. In 1919, Wilson suffers a massive stroke. He's incapacitated. But instead of resigning, his wife, Edith Wilson, essentially runs the executive branch for months. Some call her the first female president, unofficially, of course. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Wilson was such a wordsmith that he once rewrote a love poem in Greek for fun. He also kept a flock of sheep on the White House lawn during World War I, both to save money on groundskeeping and to auction their wool for the Red Cross. Historians still argue, was Wilson a visionary whose ideas were too bold for his time, or a rigid idealist who mistook stubbornness for strength? You sink now into the quiet after the cannons, the stillness of a world exhausted by war and disappointed by peace. Wilson lies in bed, half paralyzed, dreaming of a league that never came to be, his final exam incomplete. You drift now into a nation groggy from war and idealism, reaching for a blanket and a smoke, anything to feel normal again. That's when Warren G. Harding shows up, promising exactly that. Normalcy. Not greatness, not perfection, just the familiar hum of life before the storm. It's 1921. You stroll beside Harding, tall, silver-haired, and impossibly handsome, like a president conjured out of central casting. His voice is smooth, his handshake warm, and his message refreshingly simple. No more crusades, No more upheaval, just quiet prosperity and a government that minds its manners. And America buys it, big time. He wins the 1920 election in a landslide. You picture crowds cheering more out of relief than passion. Harding's campaign is a front porch affair, literally. He gives speeches from his house in Marion, Ohio, while a brass band plays on the lawn. It's nostalgia with a necktie. But behind that easygoing charm, the gears are misaligned. Harding, by his own admission, is no micromanager. He delegates a lot. His cabinet is a mixed bag. On one side, capable reformers like Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover and Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes. On the other, the Ohio gang, his poker buddies turned policymakers who see public office as more of a vending machine than a calling. The scandal that breaks it all. Teapot Dome. You lean in as news spreads. Oil-rich federal lands in Wyoming and California were secretly leased to private companies in exchange for hefty bribes, cash, bonds, even cattle. It's political theater, just with fewer morals. Harding doesn't seem directly involved, but he appointed the players. He gave them the keys, and now the headlines are on fire. He writes in frustration, "I have no trouble with my enemies, but my friends, they're the ones that keep me walking the floor at nights." You imagine him pacing, the wallpaper peeling slightly, wondering how the promise of normalcy unraveled so fast. But not everything's grim. Harding signs the Budget and Accounting Act, creating the first formal federal budget process, a quiet revolution in government finance. He supports civil rights more than most of his era, speaking against lynching and segregation, though Congress refuses to act. He also commutes the prison sentence of Eugene V. Debs, a socialist jailed by Wilson for opposing World War I. Harding welcomes him into the White House. No speech, just dignity. And your quirky bedtime tidbit. Harding once lost an entire set of White House china in a poker game. That's right. The commander-in-chief gambled away government property during one of his infamous smoke-filled room sessions. You can practically hear the clink of whiskey glasses and shuffled cards echoing through the corridors. In 1923, Harding embarks on a voyage of understanding, a cross-country speaking tour to rebuild trust. But he's exhausted. In San Francisco, he falls ill. On August 2nd, he dies suddenly in a hotel suite, possibly a heart attack. No autopsy is performed. His wife, Florence, refuses one and quietly destroys many of his personal papers. Historians still argue whether Harding was a bumbling nice guy who got played by his pals, or a man who knew more than he let on, but simply couldn't rein them in. Was he the guardian of post-war calm, or just a pretty face presiding over quiet chaos? You drift now beneath the amber glow of jazz and Model Ts, and in that dreamy pause between wars, Harding's promise of normalcy feels both comforting and tragically incomplete. You tiptoe now into the quietest presidency of them all. So quiet, in fact, it feels like walking through a museum after closing time. Calvin Coolidge is already seated in the corner, barely blinking, barely moving, wrapped in silence so dense it feels like it has gravity. This is the 30th President of the United States, and he's not here to impress you. He's here to not do anything rash. It's 1923. President Harding has died unexpectedly, and Vice President Coolidge is sworn in, by lamplight, by his own father, a notary public, in the middle of the Vermont woods. You watch as he raises his hand, expression unreadable, like he's just been told the weather might be turning. Coolidge is the ultimate minimalist, not just in speech, though he's famously stingy with words, but in philosophy. He believes government should be quiet, restrained, and invisible. He once said, "The business of America is business," and meant it. And you're floating beside him now through an America that's practically humming with prosperity. The Roaring Twenties are in full swing. Radios crackle, jazz thumps through speakeasy walls, and Model Ts zip down city streets like little tin rockets. The stock market climbs. Wages rise. The air smells like perfume, gasoline, and paper money. Coolidge's economic approach? Stay out of the way. He cuts taxes, slashes spending, vetoes like it's a reflex. He even rejects a bill to provide federal aid to flood victims, saying disaster relief should come from private charity, not government. You can almost hear the conservative philosophy clicking into place, precise as a pocket watch. But here's the twist. It works. For now. Unemployment stays low. The budget stays balanced. And the people, they adore him. You watch him win the 1924 election in a landslide. His campaign slogan is "Keep cool with Coolidge." It's barely even a sentence. And somehow it fits. Now your quirky bedtime tidbit. Coolidge had a pet raccoon. Yes, a raccoon named Rebecca, originally sent to the White House as a Thanksgiving meal. Instead of eating her, Coolidge gave her a collar and took her for walks around the grounds. Guests were not amused. Rebecca didn't care. And there's more. Coolidge slept a lot, up to 11 hours a day, including long afternoon naps. Staff were told never to wake him, ever, under any circumstances. One aide once asked why the president didn't do more. Coolidge reportedly replied, "If you don't say anything, you won't be called on to repeat it." He's not lazy, just deeply committed to doing less. But not everyone agrees with his hands-off style. Farmers suffer during his term. Income inequality deepens. The warning signs of an overheated economy are ignored. In 1927, Coolidge stuns the nation. He announces he will not run for re-election. His reasoning? Because there's no chance for advancement. And just like that, he bows out. Gracefully. Silently. Historians still debate his impact. Was Coolidge a principled guardian of limited government? Or a president who slept through the warning signs of a coming catastrophe? You lie back now in the hush of a well-oiled machine, everything polished, steady, humming, just before the gears begin to shake. And in that stillness, you can almost hear Coolidge whisper, "No." The hum of the 1920s is beginning to waver, like a phonograph slowing to a stop. Jazz still echoes in the air, but underneath it is something darker. Tightening credit, nervous investors, restless farmers. And into this shifting moment steps Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States, and perhaps the most ironic man in presidential history, a humanitarian who becomes the face of catastrophe. It's 1929. Hoover arrives in the White House with a sterling resume. Self-made millionaire, international relief organizer, Secretary of Commerce, and the guy who fed millions of Europeans after World War I. You watch him move through the West Wing with brisk, engineer-like precision. He's efficient, driven, and allergic to nonsense. In short, Hoover's the type who looks at a government and wants to optimize it. And at first, everything still looks golden. You sit beside him as he champions innovation, public works projects, airport development, new radio infrastructure. He believes in a technocratic future, one where data and planning can fix anything. And for a while, the country hums right along. Then, The bottom falls out. October 1929. The stock market crashes. Not just a dip, a free fall. Billions of dollars vanish in days. Banks collapse. Unemployment skyrockets. It's not just a bad quarter. It's the beginning of the Great Depression. Hoover's response is swift, but cautious. He believes in voluntary cooperation, not federal handouts. He calls on businesses to keep wages steady and charities to help the needy. It's classic Hoover. Optimistic, principled, and absolutely allergic to the idea of government dependency. But the crisis grows deeper. You stand beside him as he creates the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to loan money to banks and railroads. He backs public works like the massive Boulder Dam, later renamed Hoover Dam. But it's not enough. His reluctance to provide direct aid becomes a political coffin. Meanwhile, across the country, the dust begins to rise. Farmers face ruin. City dwellers line up at soup kitchens. Shanty towns pop up near major cities, mockingly dubbed Hoovervilles. People wrap themselves in newspapers and call them Hoover blankets. The man who once fed a continent now seems powerless at home. And your quirky bedtime tidbit. Hoover and his wife Lou spoke Mandarin Chinese and often used it to converse privately in the White House when they didn't want staff to understand them. Imagine the president whispering economic woes to the First Lady in fluent Mandarin, an oddly elegant footnote to a chaotic era. Then there's the bonus army. In 1932, thousands of World War I veterans march on Washington, demanding early payment of promised bonuses. They build camps. They march peacefully. But Hoover sees the movement as a threat. He sends in the military. Tanks roll through the streets. Tear gas is fired. The veterans are forcibly evicted. The nation watches in horror. It's the final blow. Hoover runs for re-election later that year. You can feel the tension in the air, hopes collapsing like card houses. His opponent, Franklin D. Roosevelt, sweeps the nation with promises of a New Deal. Hoover loses in a landslide. He leaves office amid boos, broken banks, and bitter headlines. Historians still argue. Was Hoover an inflexible ideologue who failed to act, or a victim of timing, with no tools strong enough to stop the avalanche? You settle now into the gloom of shuttered windows and silent factories, and somewhere behind it all, you hear Hoover scribbling plans, still trying to solve a puzzle that refused to be solved. You're standing now in a country that's cracked like dry earth. Silent factories, long soup lines, radio voices whispering hope into rooms gone cold. And then, through the haze, steps Franklin Delano Roosevelt, calm, upright, and smiling, always smiling, as if that alone could pull America out of its despair. It's 1933. FDR becomes the 32nd president in the very depths of the Great Depression. 1 out of every 4 Americans is unemployed. Banks are folding. Confidence is non-existent. But Roosevelt doesn't flinch. He raises his chin, adjusts his pince-nez glasses, and delivers a line you've probably heard 100 times. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. You don't hear the crowd exhale. You feel it. FDR brings something new to the presidency: energy, assurance, and radio. His fireside chats become instant national rituals. You sit beside families, huddled around glowing dials, as he explains complicated economic policy, like it's a bedtime story, clear, kind, and firm. His voice seems to lower the blood pressure of a whole nation. Then come the 100 days. You blink and everything changes. Roosevelt rolls out sweeping reforms, the New Deal. You watch him work with Congress like a maestro with an orchestra. Banks are stabilized, jobs are created, farms are rescued, agencies spring up like mushrooms, the CCC, WPA, TVA, FDIC. Alphabet soup with a side of ambition. Not all of it works. Some of it gets struck down. But the message is clear. The government will do something. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. FDR was obsessed with collecting stamps. He said it helped him relax. Even during wartime meetings, he'd sometimes pause to admire a new addition to his album. Somewhere between battle plans and bank runs, he found comfort in tiny squares of paper. But behind the charm is real struggle. Roosevelt was paralyzed from the waist down by polio. He never let the public see him fully immobile. You watch him clench his teeth, gripping braces and a cane, moving with quiet agony to project strength. Photographers were instructed not to take pictures of him in a wheelchair. To most Americans, he always appeared standing, somehow taller than the crisis. In 1936, he wins re-election in a landslide. He's the first president to serve more than 2 terms. The people don't just trust him, they need him. And then, as the economy slowly recovers, another storm brews overseas. World War II erupts in Europe. Roosevelt walks a careful line, arming allies, enforcing embargoes, preparing the nation mentally. Then, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The US enters the war. Suddenly, Roosevelt is not just the commander-in-chief. He's the architect of victory. He mobilizes industry, unites the Allies, and manages personalities like Churchill and Stalin with unmatched finesse. You watch factories switch from toasters to tanks, teenagers become soldiers, and ration cards fill wallets. But FDR's America isn't perfect. Japanese Americans are rounded up and forced into internment camps. Racial segregation continues in the military and at home. For all his progress, his legacy includes deep contradictions. In 1944, he runs for a 4th term. He's visibly frail now. His face is pale, his energy flickering. But he wins again. The nation can't imagine the war ending without him. He dies in April 1945, just weeks before Germany surrenders. The news sweeps the nation in stunned silence. In Warm Springs, Georgia, where he hoped to recover, he collapses at his desk, a cerebral hemorrhage. His last words, "I have a terrific headache." Historians still debate how much Roosevelt reshaped the presidency, or simply revealed its full potential. Was he a savior, a strategist, or a symbol? Most say, yes, all of the above. You lie back now, the room dimming like a wartime blackout, and somewhere in the distance, a radio crackles faintly. The only thing we have to fear, and then, silence. The war isn't over, but the world has already changed. And now, into the biggest shoes in American history, steps a man who once owned a men's clothing store. Harry S. Truman, blunt, bespectacled, and underestimated, becomes the 33rd president in the kind of moment you can't prepare for. FDR is dead. The country is still at war. And Truman? He's barely been vice president for 3 months. It's April 1945. You're standing in a hushed Oval Office as Truman is sworn in. He looks stunned, because he is. He wasn't close to Roosevelt. He wasn't looped in on major policies. He didn't even know about the Manhattan Project until after taking office. And now he's about to face decisions that would shake the very core of civilization. You walk with him through his first weeks, cautious, respectful, determined. He makes no grand speeches. He doesn't try to copy Roosevelt. Instead, he moves forward, step by step. Then comes August. 2 cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The atomic bomb. You watch the sky light up, brighter than thought itself. Truman's decision to use the bombs is as controversial as any ever made. He says it was to end the war quickly, to save lives. Critics have debated it ever since. The results? Unimaginable devastation. Japan surrenders days later. World War II is over. Truman's approval rating skyrockets. But peace proves no easier than war. You drift into the post-war swirl of 1946-1948, where Truman navigates the minefield of Soviet expansion. The Cold War begins to take shape. He lays down the Truman Doctrine. The US will support free people resisting communism. He backs the Marshall Plan, pouring billions into rebuilding Europe. Containment becomes the name of the game. Then, 1948. Truman faces re-election. Almost no one thinks he'll win. He's trailing badly in the polls. The Democrats are fractured. The Chicago Tribune prints early editions proclaiming, "Dewey defeats Truman." You stand next to Truman as he gleefully holds up the paper after his shocking victory, grinning like a man who just beat the odds by sheer will. But he's not done fighting. In 1950, the Korean War breaks out. North Korea invades the South. Truman sends troops under a United Nations banner. The conflict grinds into a brutal, bloody stalemate. He fires General Douglas MacArthur, a national hero, for insubordination. It's bold, controversial, risky. But Truman doesn't flinch. Civilian control of the military must be preserved. Period. Here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Truman would start his mornings with a brisk piano session. He loved to play. He even once performed for an audience of screaming teenage girls when he was a senator. For a moment, the future president of the United States had teen fangirls. He also adored brisk walks, so much so that the Secret Service could barely keep up. "Give 'em hell, Harry," wasn't just a campaign slogan. It was a lifestyle. Yet Truman's presidency wasn't all fire and steel. He desegregated the armed forces in 1948 by executive order. No committee, no vote, just a stroke of the pen. A huge step forward, met with fierce resistance, but he never backed down. Historians still debate Truman's legacy. Was he a gritty realist who made impossible choices, or a stubborn leader who too often dug in where nuance was needed? Maybe both. He leaves office in 1953 with low approval ratings, exhausted by war, scandals, and a changing world. But over time, his stock rises. His bluntness, honesty, and decisiveness age well. Like a quiet whiskey that burns at first, but settles warmly. Now you rest in a world shaped by Truman's choices: atomic shadows, divided careers, Cold War frost, and hear, faintly, the keys of a piano playing somewhere in Independence, Missouri, steady, stubborn, and true. The Cold War winds tighten, jazz gets sharper, and a former 5-star general takes the stage, calm, polished, and full of quiet authority. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th President of the United States, doesn't need to prove anything. He commanded Allied forces in World War II. He planned D-Day. And now, in 1953, he's swapping his helmet for a briefcase and stepping into the White House like a man arriving back at base camp. You stroll with him through a presidency that feels deceptively calm. The economy is booming. Suburbs are sprouting like weeds. Cars stretch across endless highways. It feels like progress, and Eisenhower is the steady hand guiding it. But beneath that white-haired composure, big choices, big consequences. He's a Republican, but not a flamethrower. Ike governs from the center, balancing budget discipline with social stability. He expands Social Security. He funds science education. He approves the interstate highway system, 41,000 miles of road that transform how America moves, shops, works, and flees town during a zombie apocalypse. Kidding, mostly. You ride shotgun in the presidential limo as those concrete ribbons stretch out across states, reshaping the economy and the landscape. Gas stations bloom, motels multiply. You can thank Ike for that weekend road trip to see the world's largest ball of twine. Then there's foreign policy. You stand in the Situation Room as Eisenhower wrestles with nuclear strategy. He believes in deterrence, not direct war. His new-look defense policy relies on nukes as a cheaper, faster counter to Soviet aggression. It's the Cold War version of don't start none or won't be none, but tensions rise. In 1953, he ends the Korean War with a firm ceasefire. The line at the 38th parallel freezes, but there's no peace treaty, just a pause button that's still blinking today. You watch Eisenhower deal with crises in Iran and Guatemala, both times supporting CIA-led coups to keep friendly governments in power. Oil and bananas, democracy and domino theory, all tangled together. Historians still debate whether he was safeguarding freedom or setting fires for future generations to put out. At home, Eisenhower faces another front, civil rights. In 1954, the Supreme Court hands down Brown v. Board of Education, declaring segregation in public schools unconstitutional. The South fumes. Resistance mounts. In 1957, Ike sends federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, to escort 9 black students into Central High School. You watch soldiers stare down angry mobs. Eisenhower, who never wanted to be a civil rights president, becomes one anyway, at least in that moment. And now, your quirky bedtime tidbit. Eisenhower loved golf. Really loved golf. He played more than 800 rounds while in office. The White House even had a putting green installed. One time, he had squirrels removed from the green because they kept interfering with his game. Yep, presidential squirrel eviction. It happened. Despite his popularity, Ike wasn't flashy. He warned of the military-industrial complex in his farewell address, a sobering caution against runaway defense spending and private influence over war-making. It's one of the most quoted exits in presidential history, and eerily prophetic. Historians mostly agree. Eisenhower was a master of behind-the-scenes leadership. He let others talk while he maneuvered. He acted slowly but deliberately. Critics once called him disengaged, but documents later revealed a presidency carefully choreographed behind the curtain. You settle now into the glow of a television set. The 1950s playing out in black and white. Elvis shakes, Rosa Parks refuses to move, and somewhere, Eisenhower leans on a golf club, smiling softly, knowing that steady doesn't always mean slow, and calm isn't the same as passive. The television flickers again, and now the world's in full color, and center stage stands John F. Kennedy, the 35th president, young, tan, and beaming like he's just stepped off a movie set. It's 1961. Eisenhower has retired to the fairways, and America is ready for something new, something vibrant, something cool. And JFK? He's all of that, and more. You walk beside him through his inauguration. The snow has barely settled on the Capitol steps, and he's already delivering one of the most quoted lines in American history. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. The crowd chills. The camera clicks. The world listens. Kennedy brings style to the presidency like no one before. You watch as he turns press conferences into performance art. Quick, witty, being charming. He cracks jokes. He quotes poetry. He makes the presidency feel like a promise. His wife, Jacqueline, redecorates the White House and charms the world with elegance and fluency in French. It's Camelot, they say. And for a brief moment, it shines. But charisma doesn't stop crises. Early in his presidency, JFK greenlights a CIA plan to overthrow Fidel Castro. The Bay of Pigs invasion. It's a fiasco. Cuban exiles land in swamps, face fierce resistance, and the whole thing collapses in 48 hours. You watch Kennedy take the blame publicly. His approval rating goes up. America loves a president who owns his mess. Then comes the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. You sit beside Kennedy in the Oval Office, tension thick as soup. Soviet nuclear missiles are discovered in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. The world is closer to nuclear war than it has ever been. For 13 days, it's a chess match between Kennedy and Khrushchev. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. During those terrifying days, JFK kept a secret stash of handwritten notes on how to explain World War III to the American people, in case he survived it. Luckily, he didn't need them. A deal is struck. The Soviets remove the missiles. The US removes its own, quietly, from Turkey. The world exhales. But the Cold War doesn't cool. Kennedy escalates US involvement in Vietnam, sends military advisors, believes in containing communism, but hesitates to go all in. The seeds of a tragic future are planted here, quietly, beneath the canopy of Southeast Asian trees. And at home, civil rights tensions erupt. Martin Luther King Jr. rises. Protests spread. Kennedy, at first cautious, begins to lean in. In June 1963, he delivers a national address calling civil rights a moral issue. It marks a shift, not just in policy but in tone. Then, Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. You're riding in the motorcade. The sun is shining. Crowds wave. The car turns onto Elm Street. Then gunshots, chaos, screams. Kennedy slumps forward. A moment, frozen in grainy footage and endless theories. He is declared dead within the hour. The nation shatters. The man who symbolized youth, charm, and American promise is gone in a flash. Vice President Lyndon Johnson is sworn in on Air Force One, beside a bloodstained Jackie Kennedy. Camelot is over. Historians debate Kennedy endlessly. Was he a brilliant visionary or an image-driven politician? A cold warrior or a cautious peacemaker? His presidency, just over 1,000 days, remains wrapped in myth, beauty, and tragedy. You lie back now beneath a starry Texas sky, and the echoes of JFK's voice still drift through the night. We choose to go to the moon. A promise unfinished, a dream deferred, but never forgotten. The funeral drums still echo faintly when Lyndon B. Johnson takes the reins, heavy with grief and determination. He's no poet, no Prince of Camelot, but make no mistake, he is a master of power. As the 36th President of the United States, LBJ doesn't just inherit Kennedy's legacy. He intends to finish it, rewrite it, and maybe even outdo it. It's 1963. You ride with him in the darkened car back to Washington. He's stone-faced, but behind those tired eyes is a mind already whirring with strategy. Johnson knows Congress. He knows where the levers are hidden and which ones squeak. After all, he used to run the place. And so, the gears begin to turn. In 1964, he signs the Civil Rights Act, a towering piece of legislation banning segregation in public places and employment discrimination based on race, religion, or gender. He tells advisors, "We've lost the South for a generation." And he's right. But he does it anyway. Then comes the war on poverty. You walk alongside him through a cascade of ambitious legislation. Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, food stamps, public housing reforms. He calls it the Great Society, a vision to lift every American, especially the forgotten, the poor, the sick. It's the most sweeping domestic reform agenda since the New Deal. He wins the 1964 election in a historic landslide against Barry Goldwater. It's a political tidal wave, and for a while, Johnson is on top of the world. Then, Vietnam. The conflict had been simmering for years, but under Johnson, it explodes. You hear about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where sketchy naval skirmishes lead to Congress giving LBJ broad authority to escalate. He sends hundreds of thousands of troops. The war grinds forward, body counts rising. Televisions beam the carnage into living rooms across the country. And here comes your quirky bedtime tidbit. LBJ had a phone installed in his bathroom. He conducted business while on the toilet. His aides hated it. Foreign dignitaries were horrified. But Johnson didn't care. He said, "When I need to talk, I talk." That was the man, direct, brash, and often way too honest. At the same time, America is unraveling. 1965. Malcolm X is assassinated. 1967. Riots erupt in Detroit and Newark. 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. is gunned down in Memphis. The streets burn. Then, 2 months later, Robert Kennedy is assassinated. The sense of progress begins to blur into chaos. Protests erupt over Vietnam. Students chant outside the White House. Johnson begins to feel the weight. He paces the halls, sleepless. In 1968, despite being eligible for another term, he shocks the country. "I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president." You imagine the silence in the room when he says it. Historians argue fiercely about LBJ. Was he a social justice giant undone by foreign war, or a deeply flawed leader whose legacy was split down the middle, half healing, half burning? Either way, he left the presidency having changed the country forever. You lay back now in the shadow of both a war and a promise, with Medicare cards in wallets, civil rights enshrined in law, and helicopters still circling over distant jungles. And somewhere in the distance you hear Johnson's Texas drawl, "What the hell's the presidency for, if not to fight for what's right?" The air smells like gunpowder and patchouli now. Protest signs sway in the wind. Nixon buttons gleam on lapels. And America is caught between Neil Armstrong's moon boots and napalm plumes over Vietnam. Into this turbulent storm walks Richard Nixon, the 37th president, a man so paradoxical you feel like you need two narrators to explain him properly. It's 1969. Nixon takes the oath with a furrowed brow and a sharp suit. His voice is flat, almost tired, but beneath it is ambition carved out of stone. He's been through political death and resurrection before. Lost the 1960 election to JFK. lost the California governor's race in '62, told the press you won't have Nixon to kick around anymore. And yet, here he is. You walk beside him as he enters a nation already at war with itself. Vietnam rages on. He doesn't promise immediate peace. He promises peace with honor, a slow withdrawal, a strategy called Vietnamization. Let the South Vietnamese fight their own war, while America edges toward the exit. And then, 1970, Cambodia. Nixon expands the war. Protests explode. At Kent State, the National Guard opens fire. 4 students die. The war abroad now has casualties at home. But Nixon is more than Vietnam. You're there when he pushes for major environmental reform. Yes, Nixon. He creates the Environmental Protection Agency, signs the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. His speeches are sprinkled with phrases like conservation and stewardship. You blink, surprised, but it's true. Tricky Dick goes green. On the global stage, he rewrites the rules. You board Air Force One in 1972 and fly to China. Nixon becomes the first US president to visit the People's Republic. You watch him clink glasses with Mao Zedong. It's diplomatic theater of the highest order. Next stop, the Soviet Union. He meets with Brezhnev. Together, they sign the Salt-Y Agreement, limiting nuclear arms for the first time in history. You can almost hear the Cold War thaw, just a little. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Nixon loved bowling. So much, in fact, he had a 1-lane bowling alley installed beneath the White House. Late at night, while the rest of D.C. stewed, you could hear the sound of pins crashing below ground as the president rolled frame after frame. Then, Watergate. It starts small. A break-in at Democratic headquarters. 5 men arrested. Barely makes the front page. But you know the drip, drip, drip is coming. Investigations, tapes, lies, more lies. A cover-up begins to unravel. Nixon insists he had nothing to do with it, but the tapes say otherwise. You sit in the gallery as the House Judiciary Committee drafts articles of impeachment. Obstruction of justice, abuse of power, contempt of Congress. Nixon's support crumbles. His closest aides resign or are convicted. The whole nation stares, stunned, as the most powerful man in the world spirals into disgrace. August 8, 1974. Nixon addresses the nation. He resigns. The first, and so far only, US president to do so. You watch him leave the White House the next morning, flashing a stiff double peace sign before boarding the helicopter. A whir of blades, a long shadow over the lawn. Historians can't decide what to do with Nixon. Was he a foreign policy genius undone by personal paranoia? A deeply insecure man who achieved greatness but couldn't escape his own inner demons? You settle now beneath the buzz of Cold War frequencies and recycled campaign jingles, wondering how someone so calculating and brilliant could fall so hard. Proof that sometimes history is made not just by greatness, but by flaws no one could fix. The nation exhales, not in relief exactly, but in exhaustion. Nixon is gone. The war is winding down. And into the breach steps a man with no electoral mandate, but a remarkably square jaw. Gerald Ford, the 38th President of the United States, and the first to reach the office without ever being elected as President or Vice President. It's 1974. You watch him raise his hand and take the oath in the East Room of the White House. Nixon's portrait looms somewhere behind him, unseen but not forgotten. Ford's first words as president are a kind of national balm. Our long national nightmare is over. But healing a country isn't so easy. Ford is a straight shooter, literally. He played college football at the University of Michigan, turned down a contract from the Green Bay Packers, served in the Navy during World War II. He's honest, calm, maybe a little dull. But after the Nixon years, dull is downright desirable. Then, 1 month into office, he pardons Nixon, just like that. A full and unconditional pardon. You can feel the country gasp. Critics scream about betrayal. The press goes nuclear. Ford says it's about mercy, not politics. He wants the country to move forward, but his approval rating tanks. The act of forgiveness costs him dearly. Meanwhile, the economy limps. Inflation rises. Unemployment climbs. Ford introduces a campaign called Whip Inflation Now, complete with buttons. It doesn't exactly spark a movement. You picture Americans blinking at the buttons, then heading to the store and finding milk is 50 cents more expensive than yesterday, and the Cold War, still icy. You trail Ford to Helsinki, Finland, where he signs the Helsinki Accords, an agreement with the Soviets and other nations that recognizes post-World War II European borders and affirms basic human rights. Conservatives hate it, but over time, it becomes a key tool for Eastern Bloc dissidents, one of history's slow-burn victories. Domestically, he's stuck in political quicksand. Democrats dominate Congress. His veto pen gets a workout. You watch him veto over 50 bills, more than any president since Truman. He's not trying to be combative. He just thinks most of them are bad ideas. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Ford was a notorious klutz in the media, but mostly by accident. One time, he slipped down the stairs of Air Force One. Another time, he bonked a golfer in the head with a wild tee shot. But the man was actually a gifted athlete, just cursed with cameras that loved a pratfall. Then there were the assassination attempts. 2 women tried to kill him, within 3 weeks of each other. Both were unsuccessful. But the fact that it happened twice in such short order is just surreal. You can almost hear the Secret Service sprinting, breathless, wondering how things got so weird, so fast. By 1906, he's running for a full term. The campaign is tough. He faces a challenge from Ronald Reagan in the Republican primary, then squares off against Jimmy Carter, the soft-spoken governor of Georgia. Ford almost wins, almost, but the pardon still lingers. The economy still hurts. In the end, Carter edges him out. Ford concedes gracefully. No bitterness, just a handshake and a smile. Historians view him with nuance. He was steady in a storm, honest in a hall of mirrors. Maybe he wasn't dazzling, but he didn't have to be. After Nixon, decency itself felt revolutionary. You rest now under the glow of bicentennial fireworks and polyester suits, and somewhere, in a quiet post-presidency, filled with golf, Ford smiles and reminds you, I'm a Ford, not a Lincoln. And that was perhaps exactly what the country needed. The disco ball spins. The gas lines stretch for blocks. America's wearing bell-bottoms and bad moods. And into the swirl steps Jimmy Carter, the 39th president, with a grin as wide as a Georgia peach, and the soft drawl of a man who promises simply honesty. After Watergate, after Nixon, and even Ford, that promise feels like a tall glass of water. It's 1907. You watch Carter take the oath, then walk, yes walk, down Pennsylvania Avenue, hand in hand with Rosalind. No limo, no parade of armored glass, just a simple man from Plains, Georgia, showing up to work. He ran as a Washington outsider, and he means it. You sit beside him in the Oval Office. He turns down the pomp, wears sweaters during energy-saving measures, tells Americans it's time to turn down the thermostat, conserve fuel, and tighten belts. This does not go over well. Americans want inspiration. Instead, they get insulation. But Carter isn't idle. He restructures the federal government, consolidates agencies, creates the Department of Energy, the Department of Education. He pushes for environmental protections and alternative energy research long before it was trending. He promotes human rights as a cornerstone of foreign policy, refusing aid to dictatorships and scolding regimes like an ethical dad at a very tense dinner party. Then, there's the Middle East. You watch him host Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Menachem Begin of Israel at Camp David. For 13 days they argue, walk in circles, nearly walk out. But Carter won't let it fall apart. He rewrites drafts by hand, coaches, coaxes. Finally, they shake hands. The Camp David Accords are signed. Egypt recognizes Israel. Peace, real peace, between two long-time enemies. It's historic. It earns him a Nobel Peace Prize years later. But at home, the applause is short-lived, because back in the States, the economy is wheezing, inflation's high, interest rates are brutal, a recession creeps in. Carter gives a televised speech warning of a crisis of confidence. He doesn't sugarcoat it, and Americans, used to flag-waving optimism, don't quite know what to do with that. The phrase sticks. They call it the malaise speech, even though he never said malaise. But the nickname sticks harder than the message. And then comes 1979. Iranian revolutionaries storm the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. 52 American hostages are taken. The Iran hostage crisis dominates headlines. Night after night, you watch Walter Cronkite report the number of days they've been held. 100, 200, 300. Carter tries diplomacy, tries rescue. The rescue mission fails. 8 servicemen die in a desert crash. Morale tanks. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Carter once reported a UFO sighting. Back in 1969, he claimed he saw something strange in the sky. He filed a formal report. As president, he requested UFO documents from the CIA. They politely stonewalled him. Apparently, even presidents don't get the good alien files. As the 1980 election approaches, Carter faces a tidal wave. Economic unrest, foreign humiliation, political backlash. And his opponent? Ronald Reagan, a Hollywood icon with a sunny smile and a simple message. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Carter loses, badly. Historians remain divided. Was he a visionary constrained by circumstance? A moral compass in an amoral system? He left the economy broken, but foreign policy moments like Camp David still shine. And after the presidency, Carter becomes a global force for peace, election monitoring, and humanitarian work, earning far more respect outside the White House than he ever did inside it. You exhale now into the quiet of a solar panel farmhouse in Georgia. Carter's planting peanuts, building houses with Habitat for Humanity, hammer in hand. Still working, still humble, still somehow hopeful. You squint into the rising sun of 1981, where the 80s are ready to dance in high tops and shoulder pads, and leading the charge is Ronald Reagan, the 40th president, flashing that Hollywood grin like it could power the entire California grid. He's the oldest president ever elected at the time, but don't let the age fool you. Reagan is sharp, smooth, and radiates optimism like it's a patriotic cologne. You watch him take the oath with confidence and charisma, a former actor who plays the role of president with uncanny ease. But this isn't just stagecraft, it's strategy. Reagan believes deeply in limited government, free markets, and the strength of American will. He calls it morning in America, and for many, it feels like that. Within weeks, he's shot. An assassination attempt. A bullet misses his heart by inches. You watch him crack a joke to surgeons. "I hope you're all Republicans." He recovers quickly. Public support surges. Reagan becomes mythic. Part president, part cowboy, part comeback kid. Now, the Reagan Revolution begins. You stand with him as he signs massive tax cuts. The idea? Supply-side economics. Cut taxes, especially for the wealthy and businesses, to spur investment, create jobs, and eventually raise everyone's boat. Critics call it trickle-down economics. Supporters call it common sense. Either way, the national debt starts climbing. But the economy also begins to recover. Reagan deregulates industries, cuts social programs, increases military spending massively. He envisions America as a shining city on a hill, armed to the teeth and free to dream. Inflation drops, unemployment falls, the stock market climbs. But beneath the boom, rising inequality, homelessness increases, AIDS rips through communities with slow federal recognition. Then, the Cold War goes into overdrive. You stand near him as he calls the Soviet Union an evil empire. He launches the Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars, a space-based missile shield that sounds more like a sci-fi pitch than a military strategy. Scientists raise eyebrows. The Soviets raise missiles. But Reagan knows the game is also psychological. And then, something strange happens. Mikhail Gorbachev takes power in the USSR. He's younger, smarter, more open to reform. You watch Reagan shift gears. At first wary, he grows to like Gorbachev. Together, they begin to melt the Cold War ice. In 1987, standing before the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, Reagan delivers a line that still gives goosebumps. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." By the late 80s, you can feel the tension break. Arms treaties are signed. Nuclear arsenals shrink. The Cold War begins to end, not with a bang, but with handshakes and hope. And your quirky bedtime tidbit? Reagan was obsessed with jelly beans, kept jars of them everywhere. In the Oval Office, on Air Force One, in meetings. His favorite flavor was licorice. One time, a jelly bean shipment to the White House included over 300,000 beans. That's enough to feed an army of dentists. By the end of his second term, Reagan is wildly popular. His critics remain vocal about civil rights inaction, economic inequality, and the Iran-Contra affair, where secret arms deals and shadowy funding for rebels tarnished his legacy. But his approval stays strong. His optimism is contagious. Historians are split. Was he a visionary who revived American confidence, or a charismatic salesman who left behind economic and social cracks beneath the surface? Reagan retires in 1989. A few years later, he reveals he has Alzheimer's. His farewell letter is graceful, poignant, and distinctly Reagan. "I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life. You rest now under that golden western sky, and somewhere a cowboy rides off, not into legend, but into memory." The Cold War is cooling fast. Wall Street is frothing, and America's just stepped out of the Reagan years like a dazzling party that maybe lasted a little too long. Into this slightly dazed landscape steps George H.W. Bush, the 41st president. He's no cowboy, no Hollywood star. He's a quiet patrician in a navy blue suit, and his superpower is something much rarer than charisma: competence. It's 1989. Bush stands tall and a little awkward at his inauguration. He speaks of a kinder, gentler nation. You nod. So does the country. It's time to dial the drama down a notch. He's the first sitting vice president to be elected since Martin Van Buren, and he knows the job inside and out. You walk with him through a world on the brink of transformation. Bush is a war hero, a Yale graduate, a former congressman, ambassador, CIA director, and vice president. His resume is almost too perfect. He doesn't promise revolution. He promises stewardship. Steady hands, measured steps, and then the world starts changing faster than anyone expected. The Berlin Wall falls. You watch it happen on TV with Bush in the White House. Crowds swarm the crumbling concrete, chipping it away with hammers. East and West Germany reunite. The Iron Curtain lifts. Communism teeters. The Cold War, that decades-long global chess match, is suddenly ending. And Bush? He doesn't gloat. He doesn't spike the football. He guides the moment with restraint, not fanfare. Then, August 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait. Saddam Hussein flexes his military muscle, and Bush responds with calm fury. You join him as he builds a global coalition. Dozens of nations, all under the banner of the United Nations. Operation Desert Storm kicks off in January 1991. The Gulf War lasts just 43 days. You watch laser-guided missiles fly. Ground troops storm the desert. Kuwait is liberated. Bush's approval rating hits nearly 90%. For a moment, he seems invincible. But at home, the economy starts to sag. A mild recession creeps in. Unemployment ticks up. And then, Bush breaks the promise. You probably already hear it echoing. Read my lips, no new taxes. But when push comes to shove, he does raise taxes to reduce the deficit. It's fiscally responsible and politically toxic. His quirky bedtime tidbit. Bush loves skydiving, really. He did it several times, even on his 90th birthday. Imagine a former president leaping out of an airplane, wind tearing through his parachute, grinning like a teenager. That's the guy, mild-mannered on the ground, but occasionally airborne for fun. Meanwhile, culture shifts. The grunge era is coming. Hip-hop is rising. The Soviet Union collapses entirely by 1991. Bush navigates it all with diplomacy and grace. He helps reunify Europe, manages nuclear treaties, and redefines the US's role as the only superpower left. But it all feels quiet, subtle, maybe too subtle. In 1992, he faces a tough re-election. Bill Clinton energizes the youth. Ross Perot siphons off votes. Bush seems out of touch, an old-world statesman in a country craving MTV energy. He loses. Historians see him now with clearer eyes, a master of foreign policy, a decent man, a one-term president who, in hindsight, presided over the peaceful end of a global conflict, who made the tough call on taxes, knowing it might cost him everything. You lie back now under a sky empty of Cold War missiles, but full of new uncertainties. Somewhere, George H.W. Bush folds a parachute, puts on his socks with care, and smiles, knowing that even one quiet term can echo for decades. Now the music changes. The Cold War's gone. The walls are down. And stepping into the Oval Office is a man who seems to bring saxophones, sound bites, and Southern charm in equal measure. William Jefferson Clinton, Bill to almost everyone, is the 42nd President of the United States, and he's about to become one of the most paradoxical figures in modern history. Brilliant and reckless, folksy and ferocious, high-minded and undeniably human. It's 1993. You watch as he takes the oath, only 46 years old, the third youngest president ever elected. His smile is quick, his eyes sharp, and his handshakes endless. He's the first true boomer president, and America is feeling the vibe, loud, fast, and full of possibility. His campaign slogan, "It's the economy, stupid," and it lands. You stroll beside him as he gets to work, balancing the budget, reducing the deficit, and steering the nation through an economic boom that lights up the stock market like a slot machine. Unemployment drops. The government runs a surplus, something that sounds downright mythical now. Technology is exploding. You hear the dial-up tone of the internet squealing into living rooms, AOL chat rooms, dot-com dreams. Clinton rides the wave like a pro surfer in a suit. Globalization, free trade, and Silicon Valley all accelerate under his watch. But he's not just the economy guy. You watch him sign the Family and Medical Leave Act. He expands the Earned Income Tax Credit. He pushes for crime reform and welfare overhaul, decisions that spark massive debate for decades to come. Some hail him as a modernizer. Others accuse him of capitulating to tough-on-crime policies that disproportionately harmed black communities. And then there's foreign policy. In 1995, he intervenes in Bosnia to end ethnic violence. Later, in 1999, he launches airstrikes in Kosovo to halt genocide, without a single American combat casualty. His foreign policy legacy is complicated, but mostly cautious, until things blow up later. Your quirky bedtime tidbit. Clinton played the saxophone on national television during his campaign, on the Arsenio Hall show, wearing sunglasses. It sealed the deal for millions of young voters, proving once and for all that a president could be cool, or at least try. But then, Monica. You're in the eye of the storm as the Lewinsky scandal breaks. An intern, an affair, a blue dress, and a lie told under oath. The country freezes. You can hear the talk shows crackle. Clinton denies it, then admits it. The House impeaches him. The Senate acquits. The entire nation seems to split in two, half disgusted, half unfazed. His approval ratings go up during the trial. The economy's booming. People care more about their 401ks than what happens behind the resolute desk. Clinton finishes his term strong on paper, but dogged by controversy. He leaves office with one of the highest approval ratings of any modern president, and a legacy that's been pulled in every direction ever since. Historians still debate. Was he a brilliant centrist who brought peace and prosperity? Or a political animal who compromised too much and let personal flaws undercut historic gains? You lie back now in the glow of Y2K anxiety and Napster downloads. Somewhere, Clinton strums a guitar, quotes policy reports by memory, and reflects on a presidency that was half symphony, half soap opera, messy, musical, and unforgettable. The 21st century begins not with a bang, but with a recount. The ballots hang, literally, in Florida. The nation holds its breath. And finally, after a Supreme Court decision that's still hotly debated, George W. Bush becomes the 43rd President of the United States. You watch him take the oath in January 2001, calm, composed, and perhaps a little surprised himself. He's a Texan through and through, boots, brush clearing, and that unmistakable folksy swagger. You might expect a laid-back presidency, but history has other plans. Big ones. At first, things are quiet. Bush pushes tax cuts, massive ones. You watch him work with a Republican-controlled Congress to deliver the largest tax reduction since Reagan. His message: government's too big, and Americans know how to spend their money better than Washington does. Then comes September 11, 2001. You're there. You see the smoke, hear the sirens, feel the silence after the towers fall. The nation reels. Everything changes. Bush is reading to school children when he's told. You watch his face freeze, process, and then shift. Within hours, he addresses the nation. Days later, he stands at ground zero, bullhorn in hand, surrounded by firefighters and rubble. "I can hear you," he shouts. "And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon." From that moment, everything accelerates. The war on terror begins. First stop, Afghanistan. US troops invade, dismantling the Taliban, hunting Osama bin Laden. For a while, it looks like swift victory. But the war won't end. It evolves, deepens. Then comes Iraq. Bush insists Saddam Hussein is building weapons of mass destruction. You trail him through the halls of the United Nations, watch him make his case to the world. In 2003, US forces invade. Baghdad falls quickly, but there are no WMDs. Insurgency explodes. The war stretches on, years, lives, billions. Approval wanes, questions rise. And your quirky bedtime tidbit. George W. Bush is a talented painter. After leaving office, he took up portrait painting seriously. You can find detailed oil portraits of world leaders and wounded veterans painted by the man who once led the free world. Who knew? At home, Bush faces Hurricane Katrina in 2005, a natural disaster that turns into a political one. The federal response is slow. New Orleans drowns. You watch the president fly over the wreckage in Air Force One. Critics call him out of touch. His approval dips and never fully recovers. Still, he pushes through landmark initiatives. The No Child Left Behind Act reforms education. The Medicare prescription drug plan expands coverage. He also institutes PEPFAR, an ambitious AIDS relief program that saves millions of lives in Africa. It may be his most widely praised legacy. But the final blow comes in 2008. The global financial crisis hits like a meteor. Banks collapse, the housing market implodes, unemployment spikes. Bush authorizes a controversial bailout to stabilize the economy. It's the right move. Many say it prevented a second Great Depression, but it leaves the country angry, anxious, and ready for change. Historians still wrestle with Bush's legacy. A man of strong convictions who believed in moral clarity, but whose decisions led to some of the most divisive conflicts in modern American history. Supporters praise his resolve. Critics cite his blind spots. Almost all agree. He faced more crises than most and was transformed by them. You rest now in the long shadow of wars without end, tax cuts, town halls, and Texas brush. And somewhere, in a quiet studio, a former president adds another brushstroke to a canvas, still trying to make sense of it all. Now the air changes again, cooler, quieter, and buzzing with a new kind of electricity. A crowd gathers on the National Mall. Over 1 million people stand shoulder to shoulder. It's January 20th, 2009, and you're right there, shoulder deep in winter coats and history, watching Barack Obama become the 44th President of the United States, the first black president. The symbolism alone hums like a live wire. He steps to the podium, poised and graceful. His hand raises. The oath begins. It stumbles. Chief Justice Roberts flubs the wording. They repeat it later, just to be safe. But the moment is already etched in time. You feel the country lean forward, hopeful, teary-eyed, aching for renewal. He inherits chaos. The economy is in a tailspin. Banks failing, foreclosures mounting, jobs vanishing. Obama hits the ground running with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, a nearly $800 billion stimulus aimed at stopping the bleeding. You watch him pass it in the face of fierce opposition. It works, kind of. Recovery is slow, uneven, but the slide stops. He also bails out the auto industry, something few believed possible. GM and Chrysler survive. You watch auto plants in Michigan sputter, then fire back up. Jobs trickle back, not a flood, but a pulse. Then comes the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. You sit in endless meetings, town halls, and filibusters. The fight is brutal. He's accused of socialism, tyranny, wrecking healthcare. The bill barely passes, but for millions, it means insurance. Finally, pre-existing conditions are no longer a death sentence. Parents can keep their kids on their plans. The system is still flawed, but the ACA changes the game. Obama also ends Don't Ask, Don't Tell, allowing LGBTQ+ individuals to serve openly in the military. He orders the killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011. You imagine the helicopter blade slicing over Abbottabad, the hush of Navy SEALs moving like ghosts. The mission is successful. The target is down. You hear crowds cheering outside the White House, waving flags in the dark, and your quirky bedtime tidbit. Obama collects comic books. Spider-Man and Conan the Barbarian were among his favorites as a kid. Somewhere, in a quiet moment between briefings and crises, you imagine him flipping through pages of Spidey, wondering how to balance power with responsibility. His presidency is defined by restraint and dignity, but it's not without frustration. Congress locks up after 2010. Partisan trench warfare begins. Gridlock becomes normal. The Tea Party rises. Tensions simmer. And in 2012, he's re-elected. This time against Mitt Romney, in a campaign dominated by the economy, healthcare, and culture wars. Then, Charleston, Sandy Hook, Ferguson, Trayvon Martin. The country begins confronting the deep, festering wounds of race, guns, and justice. Obama responds with eloquence, but the divide only seems to deepen. His calls for unity are met with applause and fury. He's a symbol of hope for millions. For others, a lightning rod. The first black president represents a triumph, but also a trigger. You feel the tension everywhere, in classrooms, courtrooms, campaign rallies. The post-racial America never quite arrives. Still, Obama remains cool, unflappable. He restores diplomatic ties with Cuba, negotiates the Iran nuclear deal, signs the Paris Climate Accord, tries to lead a world growing louder, faster, and hotter. And when he leaves office in 2017, he does it with grace. No scandals, no tantrums, no scorched earth. Just a wave, a smile, and a letter to his successor, reminding him to preserve democracy above all. Historians already see Obama as transformational. A brilliant orator, a careful policymaker, and a leader who walked an almost impossible tightrope. Was he too cautious, too professorial, or exactly what the moment demanded. You exhale now under the shimmer of drone lights, podcast intros, and presidential playlists. Somewhere, Obama reads Baldwin, hums to Aretha, and reminds a generation that "yes, we can" isn't a slogan. It's an unfinished sentence. You blink, and suddenly the tone shifts. Louder, brasher, more gold-plated. The escalator ride, the red hat, the roar of rallies. It's 2017, and Donald J. Trump becomes the 45th President of the United States. Real estate mogul, reality TV star, political outsider with a Twitter feed like a cannon. You watch him place his hand on the Bible, jaws drop around the world, and the new era begins. Not with careful policy papers, but with exclamation points. Trump's rise is as unlikely as it is seismic. No military background, no political office, just a brand, built on business, towers, stakes, and shows. He campaigns like a wrecking ball, against the media, against both parties, against the swamp, and to the shock of pundits everywhere, it works. You step into the White House with a president unlike any before. In his first week, he signs a controversial travel ban affecting several Muslim-majority countries. Courts strike it down. He revises. It's a preview of the years to come. Constant confrontation, legal chaos, and loyal supporters cheering every move. He slashes corporate taxes, guts regulations, appoints conservative judges at a record pace, including 3 Supreme Court justices, tilting the bench for a generation. The stock market climbs. Unemployment dips until everything crashes fast and hard. Enter 2020. COVID-19 hits like a runaway train. You watch as the country locks down. Hospitals overflow. Millions lose jobs. Trump battles not just the virus, but the press, scientists, governors, and sometimes himself. Daily briefings become surreal. One day, he praises bleach. Another day, he spars with reporters. Through it all, his base remains loyal. Then comes the George Floyd protests. Streets fill with fury and frustration. You see tear gas, clashes, marches coast to coast. Trump responds with a mix of law and order rhetoric and Twitter thunder. He walks across Lafayette Square after protesters are forcibly cleared, holds up a Bible outside a church, and the nation watches, stunned or elated depending on the channel. But let's rewind a bit. Foreign policy? Trump pulls the US out of the Paris Climate Accord, withdraws from the Iran nuclear deal, meets 3 times with Kim Jong-un, something no other US president had done. Talks peace, shows videos, signs vague declarations. But not much changes. Trade wars flare up, especially with China. Tariffs fly. Global markets shake. Farmers struggle. Still, Trump touts strength. America first. Always America first. And here's your quirky bedtime tidbit. Trump doesn't drink alcohol, not a drop, ever. After watching his brother struggle with alcoholism, he swore off it entirely. That's one surprising contrast amid the bluster and branding. The 2020 election arrives like a tidal wave. The pandemic still rages. Mail-in ballots surge. And when the votes come in, Joe Biden wins. Trump refuses to concede, claims fraud, lawsuits fly, none succeed. January 6, 2021. You hear the Capitol doors rattle. Rioters swarm. Flags wave, some American, some not. It's the first time in US history that a peaceful transfer of power is violently interrupted. Congress evacuates. Officers are injured. A nation watches in horror. Trump is impeached, again. The first president to face impeachment twice. He's acquitted again. And yet, the shadow of that day lingers. Historians wrestle with his legacy in real time. Some see economic gains and court reshaping. Others see democratic norms shredded. Most agree. He exposed deep fault lines, and he changed the presidency, perhaps permanently. You lie back now in a world of social media soundbites and polarized everything. And somewhere, Trump tweets, well, truths now, into the digital ether, still campaigning, still capitalized, still very much not done. The dust hasn't even settled when the 46th president steps forward, calm, deliberate, and wrapped in decades of political experience. Joseph R. Biden Jr., once the youngest senator in the chamber, now becomes the oldest man ever elected to the presidency. It's January the 20th, 2021. The Capitol is ringed by thousands of National Guard troops. The air is cold. The country, still rattled from an insurrection, is watching with weary eyes. You hear Biden's voice, steady, gravelly, deeply familiar. His inaugural speech is less about celebration and more about healing. He promises unity, empathy, a return to normalcy. It's the anti-escalator, anti-reality TV moment. The pendulum swinging again. You walk with him into a presidency already on fire. COVID-19 still surges. Vaccines have arrived, but distribution is a mess. Biden ramps up production, opens mass vaccination sites, pushes federal mandates where possible. Within a year, over 200 million Americans are vaccinated. Critics rage about restrictions. Supporters hail the coordination. The pandemic slowly, unevenly recedes. The economy? Still shaken. Biden signs the American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion aimed at recovery. Stimulus checks, expanded child tax credits, vaccine funding. The job market rebounds, but inflation creeps in. Supply chains choke. Gas prices climb. Critics blame spending. Supporters blame global factors. Either way, the vibe is tense at the pump. Then comes Afghanistan. The war Biden long criticized finally ends, but not smoothly. You watch chaotic scenes unfold in Kabul. Helicopters evacuating embassy staff, desperate crowds swarming planes, the Taliban taking over faster than intelligence had predicted. Biden defends the decision to withdraw, but the execution takes a toll. His approval ratings slide. Still, he pushes forward. He signs a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, roads, bridges, broadband. A rare bipartisan success. You ride with him past crumbling highways and rusted rail lines, where soon enough new projects will rise. The message is clear. Rebuild America brick by brick. Climate policy returns to the global stage. Biden re-enters the Paris Agreement, pushes green energy incentives, champions the Inflation Reduction Act, a sweeping climate and health bill that surprises almost everyone by passing. But political tension is thick as ever. The 2022 midterms loom. Biden frames it as a battle for democracy itself. The shadow of Trump still hangs, loud, looming, not gone. Trump-backed candidates dominate Republican primaries. Some deny the results of the 2020 election outright. The midterms defy expectations. Democrats keep the Senate. The red wave doesn't materialize. And your quirky bedtime tidbit? Biden loves ice cream. He's got a documented weakness for vanilla chocolate chip. Stops on campaign trails often involve cones. One photo even shows him solemnly pondering a double scoop, as if it were a foreign policy crisis. Meanwhile, Biden leans hard into a restore the soul of the nation message. He ramps up antitrust scrutiny, cancels some student debt, appoints Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman to the Supreme Court. His staff is the most diverse in American history. Ukraine changes everything. In February 2022, Russia invades. Biden rallies NATO allies, sends aid, weapons, money, but not troops. His administration balances a global response without triggering a wider war. It's a diplomatic high-wire act, unsteady, but so far holding. Historians are still writing this chapter. Biden's presidency is defined by contrast. Crisis and calm, bold legislation and stubborn inflation, generational change and generational leadership. He governs like a man who's been waiting his whole life for the job and knows every second counts. You exhale now into a world still healing, still arguing, still tweeting, but maybe, just maybe, remembering how to compromise. Somewhere, Biden leans against the resolute desk, stirs his coffee, and whispers to the room, "Come on, man." And for a beat, the world slows. And now, the curtain trembles, but it hasn't quite fallen. The 47th section of our journey brings us not to a final verdict, but to the present moment, a living, breathing presidency still unfolding. Because, as of this gentle evening, Joe Biden still occupies the White House, and America remains a nation caught between the steady tick of tradition and the sharp buzz of transformation. You stir gently in this strange, in-between space. The headlines haven't stopped. Debates echo across living rooms. Biden, now well into his 80s, still walks the tightrope, managing an increasingly complex world stage while juggling bitterly divided domestic politics. The 2020 24 election looms, questions swirl. Will he run again? Can he win? Will Trump return? Is this the start of a new era, or the final round of an old rivalry? Polls flicker like candle flames, one day up, the next day down. But Biden, the lifelong politician, marches forward, sometimes with a grin, sometimes with a teleprompter, sometimes with a quiet, almost grandfatherly fatigue. You can see it in his gait, but you also hear it in his conviction. He knows the stakes. Democracy, he says, is fragile. In speech after speech, he returns to the same themes: unity, dignity, decency. He warns of extremism, of political violence, of what happens when institutions crack too far. But he also believes in America's ability to rebuild, again and again and again. He continues to sign executive orders, to meet with world leaders, to whisper into microphones and sometimes shout into them too. The camera never stops rolling now. Every word is passed, every stumble memed. But through it all, Biden remains Biden, gaffe-prone, affable, occasionally biting, but always moving forward. And the nation around him, still aching, still brilliant, still exhausted. Culture wars rage louder than ever. AI surges into every aspect of life. Climate disasters grow fiercer, but so does innovation, so does conversation, so does the courage of the American people to ask, what comes next? And now, your quirky final presidential tidbit. Biden's dogs have made headlines several times. Major, the German Shepherd, was the first shelter dog in the White House, but also got into a little trouble for biting staff. Later, Commander took over and bit even more staff. It's a strange modern footnote. The presidency, interrupted by canine diplomacy. So here you are. You've walked beside every leader, from powdered wigs to red ties, from log cabins to TikTok briefings. 46 men. 46 sets of dreams, flaws, victories, and missteps. No perfect ones, no simple ones. Just a mosaic of people. Some noble, some cruel, many somewhere in between. Trying, in their own way, to steer this beautiful, messy experiment called America. And through it all, you've made it. Now take one last breath and let it drift out like the final note of a lullaby. Let the echoes of history soften and fade. The marches, the speeches, the wars and promises, all quiet now. The flags are still, the papers are filed, and you are floating gently far from the headlines, in a warm, starry silence. Let the names blur, the timeline stretch, and the world hush to a whisper. You've traveled across centuries tonight, and you deserve your rest. So close your eyes, tuck the past around you like a soft blanket, and let sleep carry you away.